Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome, Patriots, to another edition of the Raising Cain Show. I was out last week visiting my father, who was in the hospital, and so I appreciate all of you that were keeping him in prayer. Tonight, we have a really great guest, a friend of mine, somebody that I've worked on some interesting projects where we've done some investigative research into. Walter Curt, and I am excited about what we're going to be talking about tonight, because I think right now it's critical for true conservatives to speak up when they see things that are going on, especially within our own group, within our own party, where there are problems. We have to speak out. And so we're going to do that tonight. We're going to be talking about some of the problems that are happening within the MAGA movement and where it stands today, leadership struggles, internal disagreements, and the very public rift between influential voices like Tucker Carlson, Candace, Owens, and the rest of the MAGA movement. But we also are going to be getting into some other issues as well, some controversy in Minnesota involving the Somali community and why it's becoming a national issue. And of course, as many of you know, right now there's an ongoing breaking story that is happening right now at Brown University. And so we'll be talking about this shooting on Brown University campus, and we're going to talk about that as well. Folks, stick with us. As you know, I like to run through the commercial breaks, get them out of the way so we can have an uninterrupted talk tonight. I expect that we'll probably go a little long on this one, so I think this is going to be a great talk tonight, and I hope that you all can gain something out of it. I'll be right back after a short commercial break, but stick with us, folks. We'll be right back in a moment.
Heard of Q Broadcast? It's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q Broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Starz. And the best part? There are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
Since 2017, 150,000 farms have shut down, and working farmland has been reduced by 21 million acres. The system has been crippling the remaining farmers, forcing some to adopt nefarious farming techniques, like pumping hormones and other performance-enhancing drugs into their cows so they can survive in crammed feedlots. Or the farmers are forced to jump ship and sell to land-hoarding, profit-chasing agricultural oligarchies, who use their billions of dollars to crush the competition and increase your family's dependence on their manufactured food. What could possibly go wrong? The family farm will soon be a thing of the past, unless you do something. You can. That's why there's From the Farm, an industry-disrupting platform that connects consumers directly with local farmers, which means you can buy fresh, non-factory farm food, and you'll know exactly where your food came from and how it was raised. For the first time in nearly 100 years, independent farms will have a way to not only survive, but thrive. From the Farm was founded by A.J. Richards, an active homesteader, and Brooke Entz, a CrossFit Games athlete and an Amazonian warrior in the movies Wonder Woman and Justice League. She clearly has a passion for healthy food and a healthy lifestyle. And since both AJ and Brooke come from generations of ranchers and farmers, they know what they're talking about. We can't do this alone. We need the strength of the American people behind us. Help us build a new food system that combines the wisdom of the past with the technology of the future. Investing in From the Farm isn't just a financial decision. It's an investment into our future, our small family farms, and our food sovereignty. Invest today.
Welcome back, folks, to another edition of the Raising Cain Show. Thanks for sticking around past the commercials. Lord, you know, we've got such an amazing show that we're going to do tonight. And I think it's really important, folks, that as conservatives, as Christians, that we speak the truth always, even when it's difficult. And to help me do that and help me unpack all that we're going to be going through tonight, I've asked my good friend, Walter Curt, founder of WC Dispatch. That's WCDispatch.com. He's a journalist who doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable truths or the tough conversations. Walter Curt is the founder and editor of WCDispatch.com, an independent political news and commentary platform centered on accountability, media influence, and the cultural forces shaping America today. Known for his direct and uncompromising analysis, Curt approaches political movements from the ground up, challenging establishment narratives and partisan blind spots alike, which is why I wanted him on the show tonight, because we're going to be talking about some tough comments. Look, you know, there may be a few of you folks tonight that may not want to hear what we're going to talk about, but I would just encourage you to listen. I can promise you that we are approaching these issues with humility, and I think they're important because I think we are facing something that is very dangerous in our country, and particularly within the Republican Party and the MAGA movement. So without further ado, Walter, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me on, Nate. It's been a minute since we've talked, so this should be a good episode. I'm looking forward to this. It's been a minute, but you know, there's a lot happening in the conservative movement right now. There's a rift that's been happening. There's people fighting all over the place. And after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, things have just gotten spiraled far, far out of control. And I think it's definitely worth us going through all of this stuff.
It's interesting because, you know, I have myself personally was emotionally, you know, affected by the killing of Charlie Kirk. And I had, you know, watched a number of his videos in the past, but I wasn't like a regular follower because, you know, most of what he was doing was on college campuses and, you know, and different forum, different platform. But I've seen a lot of his stuff. But somebody had sent me the video, you know, it didn't get censored. And so I saw the uncensored video of him being killed. And it shook me to my core. And I remember just weeping, you know, and I have heard story after story after story of that same thing happening to many other people. I've heard, you know, so many people that were affected that really left the Democrat Party after that left a lot of this, you know, far left ideology that made them rethink their whole way of thinking things. I've seen tons and tons of people who have come to Jesus and, given their lives over to the Lord after seeing, what happened. And then the next thing that happened was the vitriol from the left. You had just massive amounts of people, just saying the most evil, vile, wicked things, all from the left towards, Charlie Kirk's wife and children, towards Charlie Kirk and his legacy, and towards the conservative movement. And then I started seeing something that I totally would have never guessed ever, would have happened, which was you started to see people on the right who, some people I used to listen to, some people that I used to actually admire, for their boldness to stand up and say what nobody was willing to say. One of those being Candace Owens. And you started seeing her just going down this weird conspiratorial road, and that wasn't backed up with receipts, and was just extremely inappropriate, considering what had just happened. And it shocks me, to be honest, that we are where we are. But I've seen this other kind of going alongside with that. You've seen this major anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist talking points, finding its way into multiple conservative, outlets, which is very disturbing. In fact, some of these things are coming from people who I used to consider friends. And I've seen outright Nazi propaganda from World War II being recycled, into people's social media posts and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I find it abhorrent. And so I want to get into, kind of all of this tonight, and what is happening? Where is this coming from? So first and foremost, what are your thoughts on, what you've seen, and kind of how have you seen this progression? Because I saw this coming a while ago, at least with the anti-Jewish stuff. It's been growing, and I've been talking about it, probably for months now. But now it seems like it's hit a fever pitch.
Well, it seems to me that there's been a major change that has happened. And after Charlie was assassinated in broad daylight, which it's interesting that I've heard the same comment that you had, that, I didn't know Charlie personally at all, but I was emotionally affected by that as well. I mean, it was, and I think the real reason for that is it appears to many people that he was martyred. That's the best way to describe it to people. And Erica Kirk's response afterwards made it even more clear that that's what happened. So the way that she presented herself, and at the memorial when she forgave the shooter, that was the most, probably the most incredible act of Christian virtue I'd ever seen in modern era. That's the way to describe that. That was amazing. But the reaction that we've seen from these other commentators, that, Candace Owens specifically is the one that's been promoting this the most, going out there and attacking the widow, attacking his friends, attacking all of these people, and doing it for clicks or whatever her reason is that she's doing it. I never expected it would go this far. I think that things have spiraled out of control, because I really believe that Charlie Kirk was the coalition builder, and that's what he was good at. That's what everyone knows about Charlie. He was the coalition builder. And when the coalition builder was removed, the coalition started fighting, and they started fighting worse than they were fighting before, because the fighting was happening. But if you notice what Charlie was doing, he was bringing those people to events together and having them speak on stages. Tucker was coming to these stages, and they were saying, well, you shouldn't do that. And he was having other people come alongside him. Ben Shapiro's, and at the Turning Point event that's coming up, Ben Shapiro's speaking at it, but so is Tucker, and so is all these other people. So, they're still trying to do what Charlie was trying to do, which is make sure that they keep talking, because you have to keep talking. You have to keep having the conversation. But the reaction that we got from the left, the demonic almost response, which was something I've never seen before. I mean, that's the only way to really describe it. It was an evil that we saw as a response. The laughter, the cheering and jeering from the crowd, that Charlie was killed, and that he has now left his 2 small children and his wife. That was nothing short of a very, very, very clear example of where we really are as a country. And how do we get out of that? Well, we should be uniting and working together, but it appears to me that there are not people that want to do that. And you mentioned the Israel, anti-Israel rift that's happened. That's something that's grown over years. And it's something that isn't going away. And I think the reason it isn't going away is because whether people like it or not, a kind of Marxist mindset has set in this country. We've accepted some of the tenets from Marxism into the country, and it's become part of the culture to the point that people just accept it. And what I really am referring to there is that it appears to me that a lot of these people, when you hear them talking about this stuff, they're not really, they're blaming the whole Israel situation as if they're the only person that we have problems with foreign wise. I mean, not China, not Iran, not Russia. Yeah. It's Israel for some reason. But the real reason behind that is because at the root of many conspiracies, and I understand conspiracies, and I believe that there are many conspiracies that we should have faced in this country, some things that we need to deal with. There are real conspiracies. But the problem is that the mindset that is created from that, and especially when so many people latch into it, is that they believe that at the end of the day, there's some shadowy group that sits above everybody that controls the planet. And that's an old trope. That's not new. That's something that's existed for thousands of years, that people believe that the top of the line, and it just so happens that there's a lot of very successful Jewish people. Well, that's not their fault that they're successful. I mean, the problem is that when you accept this kind of tenet that there's a specific group that's so much better and they're so much more powerful than you, well, then you can't do anything. You can't do anything to fix it, and you can blame all of your problems on those people. And what it really is, and you mentioned it a bit, that it's kind of a trope that's been brought back from the World War II era. What it really is that this is a mindset that they want, that our adversaries around the world want, because they don't want the American mindset, which is I don't need anybody. I'll figure it out and do it on my own. And it's the personal responsibility aspect that has been embedded in American culture. Almost every successful American businessman, every successful American political leader, it's almost universal. They came from almost nothing and they've built themselves up. That's what the most common is. That's what the most common successful is. I mean, there are some that, they get born into it and stuff like that. But most of the time, it's they've built themselves from nothing and become successful, because that's an American mindset, that you can build something from nothing. And it's all about the personal responsibility of the American citizen. And somehow we've started to drift away from that. And I think that really is one of the biggest problems we face in the country. If we don't regain that mindset, the mindset that the American citizen is above all, that you are the one that is supposed to take care of your country, and it's not the responsibility of some foreign country, that's not their problem that we have all these issues. That's not the issue. That's not what's going on. But it's taken hold in this country, and it's because of the lack of education. It's because of the lack of teaching. We've lost a common culture amongst all of our people. And that's something that you and I have talked about many times before. In previous times, we've talked about education issues, about how, they don't teach the old classic literature anymore. They don't teach the stuff that you need to know, and they do it intentionally.
When you think about it, this is something actually that I've thought about for years. We don't have in our public schools, we don't require rhetoric or debate to be taught. Which means that people are left to their own devices. They don't know how to articulate an argument. And when you don't know how to articulate an argument, then that means you don't know how to use critical thinking. When you cannot use critical thinking, because you're not trained in that, you're not used to basically putting aside your emotions and analytically looking at a subject, what it leads to is that it leads to an emotional reaction. And I would say we have been seeing that in our country with, America's youth. Obviously, you always see it with the, the Hollywood types, right? Because people get, people in Hollywood, they get a massive platform, if you will, to kind of express their ideals, their views, whatever, even though they may not be intellectually capable of using critical thinking. They're just automatically thrown into the spotlight. But what's happened is the advent of social media has basically accelerated this to an extent that I don't think anybody could have foreseen, to where, and then you add on top of that the AI algorithms, which basically, act as an endless feedback loop to, keep feeding people what they're clicking on, so that they're never seeing any opposition viewpoint. They're only seeing what they want to see. it basically puts them in a bubble, if you will.
Mhm.
And so people are not confronted with, ideas that maybe they don't have in a way that is a safe environment, which I would say, a debate is a safe environment, right? When you have a public debate, two people of opposing ideas, without getting, acting out in violence, debating those ideas, there's going to be somebody who wins that debate. And that is the type of thing that I think in the past used to be able to move people a lot more. But now I think social media has become, in a way, much like cocaine or any other drug, which people get addicted to, and they can't put their phones down. They can't stop doom scrolling. And because the way the algorithm is written, it just keeps reinforcing whatever it is that they're leaning towards.
Well, there's another part of it too. And this is something that you and I have also talked about, which is the censorship aspect that existed for the past few years. I think that what we might be seeing right now, and this is why it's such a violent reaction, almost is the way I'd refer to it, is that over the past few years, whenever there was a issue online, they censored people and they stuck them in silos. And you would never see an opposing viewpoint, no matter what you did. I mean, it didn't matter how much you said something, how big your platform was. If they didn't want this group of people to see you, they just separated you from them, and then no one saw it. And well, then what happens? Elon comes in and opens it up. And now those ideas are clashing. They're clashing constantly because they're finally seeing each other and they're going, how on earth can you possibly think like this? How is it possible that you have that idea? You can't have that idea. No one has that idea. And they're realizing that, and you see this all the time though, because now people on the right, when they're arguing with each other, they say, well, you're paid. Someone's paying you. Someone's giving you $7,000. Someone's from Qatar is paying you. Someone's paying you. And the deal is that what's really happening is, no, the guys, there is probably, and I'm sure there is, people that are paid. Okay. I'm sure there is some people out there that are paid. But what is much more prevalent is that there are actually lots of people that you simply disagree with and you're actually seeing it. That's what I think this argument, why it's gotten so hatred towards people, because they didn't see these people before. A perfect example of this is a guy like Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes, people despise this guy. But the reality is no one knew his ideas were there for 10 years, even though he's been there the whole time, but no one saw it. No one talked about it because he was siloed out of all of the internet, the mainstream sources in the internet, and no one saw it. And then suddenly all that stops. And now lightning showed up on the screen and people are like, how on earth does this guy exist? He's been there the whole time. The problem is that and it works both ways though, because not only has he been there the whole time, but because he was siloed out of the whole system, that he has never had people then been there to properly challenge his ideas. So he has lived in this system that no one has challenged his ideas. And now he has honed it over a 10-year period into almost a mass media kind of format that a lot of people can glom onto, even if it's not accurate. But that doesn't matter because he's gotten really good at it. He spent 10 years speaking to an audience that was captured. But now people are challenging it and realizing, oh my goodness, this guy has a lot of people that pay attention to him. And they don't understand how they can get through to him because he's completely operating on a different platform entirely. He doesn't operate worrying about what people think about him because he hasn't had to. He hasn't had to worry about it. But now you're seeing it and people are going, oh my goodness, what is happening? They don't understand it. And this is what the dangers of the censorship really was. And people are just starting to learn about it.
So that reminds me and kind of brings up another point, right? Tucker Carlson brought him on a show and look, there are people who are going to agree and disagree on whether or not somebody like Nick Fuentes should ever even be given a platform. I don't think it's a good idea to completely deplatform people and cut them off for the very reason of what you're saying. In the same respect, though, one of the things that concerns me is that Tucker Carlson had him on, and it almost seemed like he was carrying water for him. Like he didn't really challenge him on his ideas. It was a very softball, type of conversation. And this is something that concerns me because when you have somebody on, and again, I believe in free speech, and in some sense, I am a free speech absolutist. So I'm not saying that we should not have people on, but I do think that we have to recognize when we're being fed a bunch of propaganda by somebody. And I've seen that, right? When Trump, you see it with the people on the left who attack Trump, and basically try to call him Hitler and try to, say that he's a racist and all of that. And then when you actually go and look at the evidence, it's not there, right? But at the same time, you also see it when you see Tucker Carlson and he goes to Russia and shows only like this beautiful presentation of Russia and how easy it is to buy food and how cheap it is there and all this thing and everything's wonderful. And and there's no ethnic diversity or anything like that, and it just seems like this really wonderful place, right? And that's not the truth about Russia. There's actually a lot of problems in Russia, and
there's a lot of ethnic diversity in Russia, a ton.
yeah, that's right. But he presented basically a very what was to me clearly an agenda. He presented essentially propaganda, and I see the same thing with Nick Fuentes in the interview that he did with him. And by the way, I've seen this with Tucker Carlson going back for years. Even though I've enjoyed watching his show and he's been bold enough to speak about things that I do agree with and I think are important, especially on the transgenderism thing and the demasculizing of men and young men. He's been an important voice to speak out about those things, and I agree with him on many of those things. But there's been a shift since he left Fox, and probably I think there was probably a fair bit of self-censorship when he was at Fox, that now that he's not there, we're beginning to actually see what Tucker Carlson really feels about some of these issues, including Israel and Zionism and that sort of thing. There's a comment in their comments, and I want to bring this up because I do want to make sure and clarify something that I think is important. So one of our regulars here, he says, why is President Trump turning on America First Congress members Rand Paul, Thomas Massie, and now MTG? So I want to be clear that Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, at least, I can say this, that they have been consistent for as long as they've been in Congress. They are opposed to foreign aid, period, to any country, including to Israel. And I think, I think both of them probably fall more on the libertarian scale of things. So I don't really have a problem with Rand Paul or Thomas Massie. They're kind of always being, like I said, they've been consistent, with their voting record and kind of what they believe. And I don't have a problem with somebody that has an issue or takes issue with an economic policy or even a foreign policy that we have. I think it's fair to discuss those things. I think when people have a problem with, our foreign policy towards Israel, I think that's fair as long as they can articulate, their concern or why they believe that maybe we shouldn't be,
as long as they give a real reason behind it. That's one thing.
Exactly.
And specifically to Thomas Massie on this scenario. So the question was about why are we turning on Rand Paul? Rand Paul is in the Senate, and I don't really see Rand Paul as the same level as Thomas Massie. The reason Thomas Massie's gotten a lot of grief is because he went in with this Epstein stuff with the Democrats and fell right into the Democrats' movement behind it and made it a whole disaster. I mean, listen, in the same thing for Marjorie Taylor Greene, guys, all the people that are out here supporting, like wondering why this is happening. How many times can you have a press conference with Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene where in the press conference, in the background, there are people with signs that say Trump is a pedophile? Do you think that might make Trump a little angry, people?
Absolutely.
I mean, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention that, look, I actually sat at a table with Marjorie Taylor Greene. This was been probably 4 years ago at a fundraising event. And I had a long conversation, probably a good couple of hours. And we talked about all kinds of stuff on foreign policy. And she was right on the money on a lot of this stuff. She has changed. I mean, she is not the same person, in terms of her ideology where she once was back then. And I think it's fair to say that, look, when people shift their position, absolutely, you have a right to disagree with them and even call them out. And I think I don't always agree with the way that Trump calls people out. I feel like, he's kind of bombastic and even somewhat petty sometimes in the way that he attacks people, but I get it. I understand why. And in the case of Marjorie Taylor Greene, she attacked Trump on multiple issues, and she did start it. And one thing about Trump is that Trump doesn't tend to start things, but he will finish it. He will punch back. That is his way. I think that's probably the New York way, to be honest with you. I've just, that's been my experience. And I think that with Marjorie Taylor Greene, I saw a picture of her, and she was, basically standing side by side taking a photo op with one of the Code Pink ladies. I don't know if you saw that just
too.
recently.
I was like, oh my goodness, what are you
I
doing,
just
Mark?
like right there, it tells me a whole lot. But one of the things that I know that where she shifted on policy that was kind of shocking is on the issue of healthcare. And she is, basically kind of moved more towards, socialist view of healthcare. And, and that is basically kind of flies in the face of everything that, that the Republican Party, platform really stands for. We're about free markets and capitalism. And to be honest with you, the big problem that we have with healthcare in this country is that the government's involved in it. The same thing with universities. Like when you look at the two things that have had the highest, increase in terms of cost, and that are the most jacked up industries, right? It's healthcare and it's higher education, and both of those things are not driven by the market. Nobody goes to the university and says, okay, I want to get a degree in this. And, and they basically, like, all the degrees are the same cost, no matter whether, if you're going to be an art teacher or something like that, or you're going to go into women's studies, you're going to end up with the same amount of debt as somebody getting an engineering degree, which makes no sense. But it creates this false premise, I guess, for what the value of an education is. And it's been totally subsidized by the federal government, which has screwed it up to begin with. The same has happened with the, with the healthcare industry. Although I would say that what drives a lot of the problems there is the lack of transparency on the cost of medicine, and the fact that the insurance industry, I think, has really kind of screwed up, and a lot of the rules that the federal government has created, where there's no competition across state lines and things like that. All of that has led to just exorbitant costs in healthcare. And let's face it, the drug companies, that I remember when George Bush Jr. voted to extend Medicare benefits to covering, the cost of prescription drugs. And it was very controversial because Republicans were opposed to that because they knew that it would completely blow the cost of Medicare, out the door. And it certainly has. And the problem is that look at the lobbyists and how much the drug industries put into and lobby in Congress. You cannot tell me that does not have an impact on the cost of healthcare and all of that. So there's so many nuances that are part of these discussions, but they don't get brought up. And it ends up, when you have these people that are fighting instead of actually debating, what ends up happening is
I agree with you. The problems with healthcare is because we balkanized the system. I mean, that's the reality of it. We've made it so that it's quasi government healthcare. It's almost government healthcare. I mean, the idea, and here's something that, a lot of people talk about why healthcare is so expensive. Well, the pre-existing conditions. Okay. Here's something, and I tell people this is an idea that I've floated many times. It's like, if you really want to fix pre-existing conditions and make that be part of it. Okay. Well, how about pre-existing conditions, but they only exist for things that are truly pre-existing, as in not lifestyle choices. Okay. If you have a congenital heart defect when you're born, okay, that's a pre-existing condition. You have no control over that. Okay. I actually don't have a problem with us figuring out a way that person can still get health insurance and not having it be insanely expensive. That's fine. But if you eat 10,000 Oreos and your foot falls off, I shouldn't have to pay for that. That's not my problem. But that's how it's covered right now. Diabetes and type 2 diabetes and heart conditions and physical wellness issues are all considered pre-existing conditions. Well, why are we doing that? And then, by the way, that's 70% of this pre-existing condition coverage, people. Okay, listen, if you have a major problem, if you smoke 7 packs of cigarettes a day and you have lung issues, that's your fault. That's not mine. And that's something we could have in a conversation, but no one talks about that part of it. I've got a friend of mine, she's got lung issues. She was born with half of one lung. I mean, that's not her fault. I want her to have insurance. Of course I do. But the deal is that the insurance bloats itself up because we've made it so that, one, there's no competition. They essentially monopolize themselves within each area. But two, it goes everywhere. When you have everybody that, you don't have to make any proper life choices and you still get the same coverage as everybody else. And it just makes it worse and worse and worse. And let alone the amount of fraud that we're seeing from the illegals that are in it. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, but this is all part of it.
Hey, there's another comment in here, and I want to get your thoughts on this because I think this is an interesting comment. It's right here. Trump started the Epstein movement. I have to say that's a fair criticism. Look, there's no doubt that maybe he didn't start it, but certainly he joined in on the calls for, I think, releasing Epstein documents and all of that. Certainly had Pam Bondi do this whole, shtick where she brought all these, people in and gave them these binders, and which I think was just completely terrible. In fact, I was very critical of Pam Bondi for the way that she handled that right off the bat, and then later pulled back and said, "Oh, well, there's nothing there. There's no there." And I think Trump's, even his handling of it, calling it all a hoax. I think that there's a fair amount of criticism, for that, and not enough explanation as to why all of a sudden the switch in the viewpoints, right? Same thing you saw that with Kash Patel and with Dan Bongino, especially, and then going there. And then they said, they talked all about how, Epstein killed himself. And then they get in there, as FBI director and the deputy director, and they make the comment, well, we've looked at everything and he didn't kill himself. These kinds of things don't help.
They don't. And I agree with you. Look, I was very critical of Pam Bondi and because I think she caused a lot of this stuff. I really think her constant tour on Fox News did not help. Okay. And since then, she has cut back her Fox News appearances drastically, which is good, but she needed to do that.
Yep.
But the deal is, and when people are talking about Trump started the Epstein movement, he did. Okay. I mean, he did talk about it. He made a centerpiece of his campaign. But the problem, guys, is that Trump, and I disagree with the way that he handled the marketing on this when he started saying it was a hoax. What he's referring to, guys, he's referring to the Democrats going after him with the Epstein stuff. That's what he's referring to, because he's seeing it as it's another Democrat attack on him specifically, even though there is no evidence to show that he's part of the Epstein stuff. That's what his problem is. He shouldn't have handled it like that. And I think it was a misstep on his part. But at the same time, when he's saying hoax, he's talking about the Democrats trying to go out there. And you saw what they did. Okay. I mean, every day they release some other stupid thing. The most recent one is they released this image and they say, oh, look at Trump. He's with these young women. And it turns out it's one of his own events from a newspaper clipping. That's the hoax part, guys. And you can see this specifically. Go look at what Norm Eisen's talking about. If you guys don't know who Norm Eisen is, it's the top lawfare DNC hack. And he is out there just excited that people are talking about the Epstein stuff. He loves it. He is so pumped up that people are buying it because he knows it's all bullshit. He does.
Well, you bring up a good point. And look at what they did to Trump with, Stormy Daniels and with what's her name, Jean Carroll or whatever. I mean, this stuff was so ridiculous, and these comments and claims that were made as Trump is running for office that just come out of the woodwork, but were never there for the last 30 years or whatever. And it's like, I'm sure that Trump is probably a little bit more cautious about, hey, when people make claims about, sexual abuse and stuff. I mean, people have made claims about him that clearly are not true. So, it is oftentimes used as, political, as a political tool to damage somebody. And I think that's a lot what's been going on. I've also was concerned too, in regards to the Epstein thing. I thought, I'll bet that, let's say that there's names. I remember watching an interview with Alan Dershowitz, okay? And he was being interviewed about him being on Epstein Island and about, why he was there. And he was very forthcoming. He said, look, I was there. I got invited. I came. I went with my wife. Yes, I got a massage. There was nothing, that happened that, was inappropriate. And he basically said, look, this is a lot of conjecture that's being made by people. And, and he was never accused by any of these, girls, or I believe he was not accused of anything inappropriate. But people were going after him. Democrats were going after him because he has been, a supporter of Trump to a certain degree. He was also a supporter of Hillary Clinton, though. So I'm not, particularly a fan of him for that. But nonetheless, I do think that he has a point, and that is that there probably are a number of people that are on the list of having been on that island, and that does not necessarily mean that they did anything inappropriate. In fact, it could very well be that some of these people on the list that were on that island, that they were just there, and maybe it was an entrapment scheme by Epstein in order to try to get blackmail, and maybe they passed the test and they didn't fall for it. Look, there's a whole lot of possibilities here, but I know that like Ehud Barak, was on the list, right? And he was a former, Israeli prime minister, which has been brought up, and look, there's probably, you had Prince Andrew on there, and I think Prince Andrew was involved in some stuff that was scandalous, obviously. But the fact is that just because somebody was on that island does not mean they actually did anything. And unless there's evidence and proof, of a crime, we all expect innocence until, basically a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And so do we really want our Justice Department releasing the names of people who may not have been involved with a crime at all, but possibly damaging, damaging them for life? And then what about Trump and his ability to, broker trade deals and broker, I'm sure a lot of the people on that list are probably foreign dignitaries and people from other countries. What about Trump's involvement in, in trying to broker peace deals and trying to broker trade deals? I agree. If somebody committed a crime and if there's evidence of that, absolutely bring down the hammer. But if all it is conjecture, then they should not be releasing, names of people who just went to an island.
And this is what it really comes down to, Nate, and for everybody who's paying attention to this stuff and so worried about this. The reality is, guys, is that there's this idea, and we were talking about this earlier, about the idea that there's this floating list, and on this list, there's going to be everyone that you hate, and they're all on this list with proof that they did something terrible. And there's a belief that there's going to be someone's going to find this list, they're going to have it, and then they're going to release it, and then all of the corruption is going to go away from DC. Yeah. All of the problems are going to be solved because the mysterious group of billionaires has been caught. Guys, this is what I'm talking about when I say this is a huge problem if you believe that. There is not some magical force that exists that controls the world. There isn't. Yeah. There's just people. Yeah. There's just people. And if you don't know that, and you don't know that at the end of the day, that people at the top of government, they're still just people. They're still just normal people that run everything. And it may seem like they're not, but they are. And there's not going to be a day where some magic list comes forward and solves all of our problems. There's only one way to fix our problems, and that is going to be the hard work of fixing this country. Actually getting things done, actually bringing new people into Congress. All of these problems are caused because we had very lazy people in Congress for far too long. For far too long, we were asleep at the wheel as a country. We were asleep at the wheel. I say after the Soviet Union fell, the country got complacent. And the country got very complacent, and it led to this scenario we're in now, where the Congress is a disaster. I mean, Congress has the lowest approval rating. It's got 12 to 15% approval rating almost always. Everyone hates Congress. It is a huge problem. And the deal is, the only way you fix that is we have to get ourselves organized and actually fix the problem from the ground up. And it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And there's never going to be a day where a magic list floats down from the heavens and saves us. That's just not going to happen. And guys, if there was, even if there was some huge conspiracy and these super powerful people, why would they have it still? They had 4 years underneath Biden. They would have killed everybody involved.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And to your point, look, folks, I turned over solid evidence of criminal activity by Hillary Clinton, okay, and many of her cronies. She's still walking free. She was never indicted. And that's because, during the time that I turned that over to Congress, to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, about a month after I completed my disclosure, you had the Republicans lost the House, and Adam Schiff became the chair, and he basically shut down the Hipsies investigation, and then likely, and this is I'm guessing here, but likely leaked to the FBI that there was a whistleblower that had turned over these documents, and it didn't take long for them to figure out. It took them 4 months actually to figure out that I was the whistleblower because they raided my home looking for a thumb drive. So there is anybody who believes, first of all of these hearings, I have come to believe that these hearings that Congress holds, they are political theater. That's what they are. When Congress holds a hearing, the point and purpose of it is whoever is in power, they are trying to win over the electorate so that they get reelected the next time around. And and maybe they are trying to bring awareness to a problem, but Congress is never going to be able to convict anybody of a crime. They don't have that power. They are legislators, and so they can pass laws and they can pay bills. That's about it. They don't have the ability to really bring anybody to justice. That is the executive branch and the judicial branch that are involved in that. And we have to get, we basically have to stop believing the kabuki theater, and start realizing what it is that Congress actually does or supposed to do. So far, what they are supposed to do, they have not been doing. That's why we had a budget impasse, and we had, a government shutdown because they couldn't pass a bill. These are the kinds of things that why I think, honestly, I think Congress has such a poor rating is the fact that they don't seem to be able to accomplish much. And I think that, but in a way, the system's designed that way, right? That's, even our founders kind of wanted it that way. They didn't want things to be able to happen quickly in Congress. They wanted there to be checks and balances. Whether that was a mistake or whether that was, a point of brilliance, I don't know that they could have even imagined that our country would, and our Congress would turn into what it is today. I mean, back then, Congress was part-time. They went out there, they voted. They were a lot like how the legislature is here in West Virginia. Our legislators basically meet for I think 6 weeks or something like that out of the year, and they vote on things, and then they go home to their jobs. And that's how it was, in Congress. But that's obviously not the way it is today. Politicians are career politicians. The system wasn't designed, for people to be career politicians. So.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't designed like that. And we could go back all the way through some of the reasons that changed. I'd say that one of the worst things we ever did, I think, is the 17th Amendment, where we stopped making it so that senators are selected by state legislators. I think that's one of the worst things that ever happened in this country. Now, the reason it happened was it was necessary at the time, but at the same time, I don't think they saw the downstream effects of that, because the Senate's where everything gets bound up at now. The Senate gets bound up, and we have senators that the geriatrics in Congress need to go home. Okay. The guys that are 90 years old, Chuck Grassley, I like Chuck Grassley. I think he's a good senator, but he's 93. Go home, Chuck. Go home. I mean, these people are dying on the floor. Dianne Feinstein literally died while she was still in office. Mitch McConnell can't speak, and he's still being wheeled around Congress in a wheelchair. Yeah. These are problems we have because these people have become exactly what you say, lifetime appointments, essentially, because they don't ever lose when they get in there.
And I can speak to this personally because I went through, running for office, that the problem is, and in my case, I was not running against an incumbent. It was an open, primary for Republicans, but I will say that we have a problem in that the amount of money that is necessary to win an election is a problem. I would say part of the problem is, and I can't remember the exact amendment that was, basically was passed but not ratified, but we're supposed to have a lot more congressmen than we currently have. And the districts are supposed to be smaller. And I think that is part of the problem. For me, when I was running, I had about 300,000, people in my district. And there was just no way possible, especially with as rural as West Virginia is in the northern half of the state, for me to get out there and meet all of those people. And so the only way to win an election in that kind of a scenario is you basically have to spend money on advertising and getting, name recognition and sending out mailers and stuff like that. I was looking at it like 100 to $200,000, in a mailer campaign, for me to even be able to compete, for the top spot, and which I was not unable to do. I didn't have, part of it was just, a lack of having never run before and not knowing, the political fundraising machine. But that brings up another point, is that the way that politics are done in the US is that you've got dark money. And so money can be coming from anywhere, including other countries, and going to corporations. This is all part of the Citizens United, decision, that where they basically said that corporations are like US citizens, and so they should have a right to free speech. And so they can basically spend as much money as they want, on political advertising, and there's nothing the FEC can do about it. And because where those funds come from is a matter for the IRS, and it doesn't matter. It's like it's none of their business. It'd be like if somebody donated money or gave money to Nate Cain, from China. And I decided to just spend that money. They gave it to me personally, and I decided to spend that money on my campaign doing something. There's nothing really they could even do or even know about that, and so it's like, and it's even more removed when it's another corporation, an LLC, or it's some, foundation that's been created, and they are spending money advertising for a political person. We don't know where that money came from. We don't know who's influencing that. I don't necessarily think that congressmen are bought and paid for in the way that most people would probably presume, because I don't think it's that simple. I think it's a lot more nuanced. But I do think that it absolutely influences. If people think that it doesn't influence their decisions and their votes on the House floor, they're absolutely wrong. It certainly does influence things, because I think it's why it basically, the constituent is never first in the mind of the politician.
Well, and part of that becomes, and when you're talking about campaign finance, part of that's because, and you're well aware of this, that, and people wonder, does it influence the vote? Of course it influences the vote. And it's the reason it influences the vote, though, is because politicians in the world that we live in currently, they have to take money from anywhere. It doesn't matter who it is.
That's right.
Who's willing to give them money, they want it. Of course they want it. They want 20 grand from you. They want $100,000 from you. You're going to give them $1 million. We'll take it. It doesn't matter as long as they get the money they need. That's what matters to them. As long as they get the money they need, they don't care who they have to talk to. Whoever it is that's willing to give them money, they'll talk to them. And that's what influences everything at the end of the day. They say, this guy gave me $1 million. Okay, well, then I'm going to keep him happy. That's just how it is.
I had regular money coming into, to my campaign early on with a fundraising activity that I got involved with, a professional fundraiser. And there were things that didn't look right about it. And so I cut it off and I said, I'm done. I'm not going to use your service anymore. And he was very nasty and got, upset with me. This guy, was working just for Republicans, but it was kind of similar to like some of the things that have been accused of Act Blue. So it happens on both sides, folks. It happens. Yeah. And the fact is that I remember, and I won't name him, but I remember talking to another America First candidate and, and warning him about this and saying, hey, if you're using this guy, you need to cut him off. And he said, look, I can't, man. I need the money in my campaign. And so he chose to keep the money and not question it. And there's a lot of problems that I see in the way that things are done. But unfortunately, it is what it is. And like you said, there is no grand, scheme of a handful of elites that are running everything. That is just foolishness. It's kind of like I remember once hearing somebody who was talking about Occam's razor, right? And they were talking about, like, do you know how hard it is to pull off a grand conspiracy that involves, people all over the country, or maybe even nationals, and without somebody leaking that information, or without somebody, it's just not. Look, and so when people talk about these grand conspiracies, I think what they're doing is they see something, and there may be truth to what they see, in the sense that you have corrupt individuals, but the notion that there's a grand conspiracy by a group of elites, and you see this, like, this is the real problem, I think, like with the Israel, anti-Jewish view. And I don't even say anti-Semitism, I just call it anti-Jewish, because a Semite is more than just a Jew. But there is clearly an anti-Jewish agenda that is being pushed by a lot of people. And I don't necessarily think that there's a grand conspiracy leading that either. Although I will say there is a lot of propaganda funding that comes from places like Iran and Hamas and, and all these other groups that clearly want to push that stuff. And, but no amount of bots, is able to completely, I think, lead people down a path. It is a combination of things, and it's a lot more nuanced. Part of the problem is that, people look at, like you mentioned, they see Jews that are successful, that are in banking, that are in Hollywood, they're in all these different places that are donating a lot of money, to politics. And by the way, there's many of them that donated to Trump, many of them that donate to the Democrat. Obviously, there's more that donate to the Democrats, but that's been shifting as well. But the problem is that people get in their head that when they see guys like George Soros and the amount of money that he's put into things with Open Societies Foundation, and then they see these people who are the heads of major corporations, or they see that are doing things that are not good. They see people that are basically a large number of Jews within groups like the pornography industry and all of these different things. And the problem is they equate this handful of unrighteous Jews with the whole race of people, which is ridiculous. That would be equivalent to somebody looking at, okay, 90% of all of the serial killers are white males. So therefore, white males must be evil, or must have some, inclination of evil towards them. Or, 90%, or, you hear this actually is probably a better example, where people say, oh, look at black on white crime. And they equate, a race, right, with this problem that you have that is a lot more than, it's way more than about race. It's about inner cities. It's about fatherless homes. It's about a lot of things that are going on that lead to violence and lead to crime and all of that. And you see this, and it's like, but people immediately go, oh, black people are violent, or black people are criminals, or more inclined to being criminals. All of that is racist nonsense. And that is what's going on, I think, with, within, this anti-Jewish, and unfortunately the Jews have a problem, right? In that being Jewish, it means different things, right? For some, it's a religion. For some, it's an ethnicity, right? And then you throw on top of that is, being an Israeli, which you don't even have to be a Jew to be Israeli. You can be an Arab Muslim, for that matter, and be an Israeli. So what they do is they conflate these things, and they see, a Jewish person who is Jewish in their religion and Jewish, and they are an observant Jew, which an observant Jew isn't going to do a lot of the things that you see some of these unrighteous Jews doing that are, I think I like what Dennis Prager calls it. Not Dennis Prager, who is it? Michael Savage, who he's Jewish himself. He calls, I watched an interesting video that he did, and he was talking about this issue. And he says, he calls these people, Jews in name only, Genos or something like that, right? Or
I like that.
Jews in name only.
One of the other problems that the Jews specifically have in this is that because of the mindset that has been created, and I would say this is probably just developed as a result of, the atrocities that have been committed against the Jews for 100, thousands of years at this point. This is a mindset that's created amongst them, that whenever any specific part of them are attacked for anything, then they also conflate it, and it makes it worse. It makes it worse. Like, this is one of the things that's happened on the right specifically. Some of the people on the right, not all, there are some that are genuinely doing the full-on anti-Semitic stuff. But there are some on the right that they're specifically going after just the government of Israel. And the reaction that you get from some of the people on the right is that they say, well, you're attacking. I'm not on the right. The Jews responding to it, they say, you're attacking the government of Israel. You're anti-Semitic. Well, that's
Sure.
not true either. That's not true either. So it goes into this both ways. And the problem is that they fight amongst each other. The people that are anti-Israel or anti-Jewish or pro-Jewish or pro-Israel, they all fight, and none of them are having a conversation or a debate. That's what drives me crazy about it.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Debate. They just don't debate at all. They don't talk about it at all. And they go, well, you're anti-Semitic, so I'm not going to talk to you or not platform you. And it doesn't work. And part of the reason that doesn't work now is because people are so that we also just lived through the worst version of censorship that's ever existed in the world. So people are now to the point where you can't tell me to stop saying things. I'm going to say it now anyway. And it is just, again, it's all the fighting and fighting and fighting instead of talking. And people really need to sit down and actually have a conversation about it. And that would fix a lot of these problems, because a lot of these people would probably agree on a lot. But the deal is that they all believe that they're being paid by somebody. I mean, it's a real issue that needs to be addressed somehow. And the Candace Owens group and the Tucker Carlson group, which is what the primary focus of our conversation here was supposed to be on here, is that the deal is that some of these people are taking it way too far. Candace Owens specifically, she's not even, I wouldn't even claim that she's specifically going about the Jews now. She's just taking the conspiracy.
She was. And then, she was. So the interesting thing is she was right at first. And then she shifted to, Erica, Kirk, and, people at TPUSA were involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk, and, or they knew about it or whatever, which is just insane.
And beekeepers and people in maroon shirts and the Egyptian military.
Yep. And I remember seeing the videos, of seeing the guy that was standing next to Charlie Kirk, and he's doing something with his hands, he's doing this, or whatever. He probably had some glasses on, and he's, maybe had some recording device on there or whatever, but he was giving signals to the shooter. Give me a break. That is so nonsense. And I'll tell you, look, folks, this is a true story. When I was working at the FBI, I was there during the time of the Las Vegas shooter. Okay. So I got to see this, firsthand, where there were all kinds of wild conspiracies about the Las Vegas shooting and, and the mass shooting that happened there. And, basically people that were making up all kinds of crazy stuff. And I'm actually looking at the evidence as it's coming in. Now, were there things that, maybe got missed, things that they didn't look at that I felt like they should have looked at? Yes. But was there some grand conspiracy to cover things up? No. Listen, most of the things that people were saying online, and as a lot of, these folks were, quite honestly, people who, were of the same mindset, that there's this grand conspiracy of, elitists trying to cover everything up. I saw firsthand, though, what the actual real evidence was, and it was not what some people were, reporting, or some people were purporting to say, of some cover up and all of that. That was not happening. You had multiple field offices actually working on that case, and that were actually, trying to get to the bottom of it, interviewing people and all of that. So this happens in a lot of these cases where, they're looking at a lot of evidence. And, and I think that it is weird with Candace. I don't know if it's about clicks and about, her making money, or if she's just so prideful that she's just doubling down on everything, even if, it gets debunked. So she starts doubling down, or if, to be honest with you, if there's something demonic going on. Look, I'm a believer that there are spiritual things that are going on all around us. And what I see happening and some of the accusations being made, to me, they do seem, very demonic.
Well, the problem that I have with a lot of what Candace is doing is that, and this is kind of a comment that, there's people that really just believe everything this woman is saying. And my only point is, guys, I understand that, we lost faith in the mainstream media. Okay, we did. The mainstream media has dropped off a cliff in credibility. No one pays attention to them anymore. But what really should have happened as a result of that happening is not, okay, the mainstream media is dead, but now all these people are just as credible. That's not accurate either. Now, what should have happened is everyone should have said, okay, now that we have no mainstream media, now that we have new people, what you should be demanding is higher standards, not the same standard. Yeah. And the same standard for them was anything they say goes. They don't have to back their claims with evidence. They get to use anonymous sources. Well, what is Candace doing?
Yep,
Candace
same
reads an
thing.
email that she won't show you and says, this is from a tipster that's a really good source. Let me read you this email. And reads this email and you go, well, can I see the email? No. Well, it's a good source. How do we know that? You don't know that. Yep. And there's no way. And the worst part about it is they don't even, she doesn't even present things that allow you secondhand ways to try and verify the evidence. She doesn't do that either. And she just keeps expanding it. You know, it's beekeepers, the French, the Egyptian military, maroon shirts, the Israelis, the U.S. government, the Chinese White Lotus is somehow involved. I mean, guys, it keeps going and going and going. And it's the problem I have with it is then now you've landed at, I'm going to attack a widow. And I'm sorry, that's when you lose me. When you smile at the camera because the widow is crying and saying, please stop. And you smile and say, she's talking about me. That's it for me. You lost me. You're not going to get me back now. Now I don't like that. To me, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, now you're a mean person. That seriously is something wrong with you.
That's right.
Because you lack
it just never goes. But the problem again is that what happened to the idea that we have to see the evidence? This is the same way that the legacy media controlled the narrative on the Russia hoax. The same way they controlled the narrative on Trump is working for Putin. The same way they control the narrative around Trump is, he's a dictator. He's doing this. He's doing that. All of it was the same stuff. Evidence is not presented. And all it is claims. Without evidence, you can't make the claim anymore. And even if the Candace Owens has the giant podcast, that doesn't mean that her information is just gold. Okay. You have to back it up with evidence. You have to. Everything has to be evidence-based. And if you can't present the evidence or at least show some version of the evidence that can be secondhand verified by other people, then I'm sorry, you just don't have a story. You just don't. And that's what, investigative-wise, any investigative story I run, I have to have receipts. People send me stuff all the time. All the time. I get tons of news stories. Hey, will you look at this? And I look at it and I'm saying, well, do you have court documents or do you have anything that I can back this up with? Something tangible, something physical, something real? No, I can't run it. I'm sorry, I can't do it. It sounds like an interesting story, and you might be right. Your theory could be the most accurate theory ever. But I'm sorry, your theory means nothing without evidence. And that's a standard that we have to hold. I mean, if we don't, we're no better than the mainstream media.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because obviously no one is going to, you're not going to see people like Candace Owens get held accountable by some media outlet. They're not going to, it's not going to happen, right? You've got plenty of, we're in this weird situation where, basically a controlled media, a media that was completely, basically running a singular narrative, and then tried to censor anybody who talked about COVID, who talked about election integrity issues. Basically you got your account deleted. What did that do? That forced the creation of all of these different platforms, many of whom, basically swear by free speech, and they're not going to shut people down. And I don't think the general public was prepared for that. And I think a lot of people, they go right on believing, maybe they used to believe everything CNN said, and now they don't, or they used to believe everything Fox News said, and now they don't. But instead of waking up to the reality that media people lie, they just woke up to the reality that the mainstream media was lying, and now they believe what is being fed to them by people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and and many others for that matter.
That's right. I mean, and that's right. And this is the problem we have is we went from a centralized media to a decentralized media, and the standards didn't change. The standards have to change. That's the only way things get better. And the other problem is that not only did the standards change, now we don't have a cohesive narrative that works across multiple things. At least the centralized media, they had one single thing that they all talked about. These are the talking points. We won't talk about anything else. Now you have a scenario when Tucker Carlson's a really good example of this. Tucker Carlson, when he goes into an interview, he has what he wants to talk about. And it doesn't matter what the topic is, you will end up talking about that issue. A perfect example of this is just today. If anybody wants to the Matt Walsh interview with Tucker Carlson, the interview starts out and Matt Walsh presents what they're talking about and how it's going. And then what is the first thing out of Tucker Carlson's mouth? Well, this is also related to Gaza, and Maduro is a conservative, a socially conservative figure. It's like, What?
Oh my
Like, how is
God.
that related? And it's not related. The deal is that that's what Tucker Carlson wants to talk about. And because it's his platform, he can talk about whatever he wants. So he can force that to be an issue, to be something to be talked about, because it's Tucker Carlson. He's allowed to do that, and there's no one telling him he can't. And that's,
Yeah.
that's part of the problem. You've got a bunch of people that they just want to focus on their little issue and not what everyone's really interested, or what the real story that they're trying to get to the root of, which is, essentially it's the same conversation we're having right now. But of course, somehow we had to bring Gaza into that. I mean, if I sat down with you, Nate, and within 2 sentences of our conversation, I said, well, don't you think that killing people in Gaza is just the worst atrocity of all time? What? I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because, one, I don't have any connection to these people. You don't have any connection to these people. I'm not from Israel. I don't really, foreign policy issues are only important to me in data, numbers, and logic, because when the things are so far away that you can't see it and be there, the only thing you can rely on is the data. That's it. That's the only thing I can look at it from a strategic mindset. I look at it 100% analytically when I look at foreign policy issues. And there's a problem with that because a lot of the people in this country, they're emotionally invested in this stuff. And you can't be emotionally invested in geopolitical issues. I mean, the idea that we need to be mad at Qatar, okay, well, Qatar is a major oil supplier to China, okay? And so is Saudi Arabia. Maybe we need to keep them as part of our strategic allies, because we need to be able to have some sort of leverage over top of 2 things that are major energy suppliers to our largest geopolitical enemy. That's the way I look at it. But a lot of people, they can't do that, especially the people that are very, very pro-Israeli and whatnot. They said, well, Qatar is an enemy. They're the worst people that have ever existed. It's like, well, okay, but you guys don't have oil. Okay, sorry. You don't have the oil. Do you have the same oil that Qatar has? No. Okay, sorry. Also, we have our largest military air base in Qatar. Do you have one of those? No. Okay, well, sorry. I mean, these are just, you have to remove the emotion from it completely. And these are the problems when you have the decentralized media guys. They can shoehorn this stuff in anyway. I mean, they can do it anyway because there's no one telling them they can't.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because we could talk all night about the problems that we see, right? But I think we got to start kind of identifying solutions to some of this. What do you see as a solution for, how we hold people accountable, in social media and on, these podcasts where people are, just making stuff up, using sources that aren't real, and not just, like I kind of see one of the things that could be useful would be litigation, for when people are just flat out lying. But I used to be one that would say, well, if they're lying, why are they not being sued? Until, and I used to say that until I had people lying about me, and I found that it's very expensive and hard to find a lawyer willing to take on your case unless you're willing to front all the money for a defamation case. So I think there has to be some way, though, of holding people accountable through the law that lie, and that lie in a way that damages you. And we have laws on the books, but I don't know what the solution is in regards to defamation or something. Like if somebody goes out and steals, right? That's a crime. And so the police show up, make an arrest, put you in jail, and now you got to defend yourself. If somebody, maybe they need to consider like severe defamation or something like that as a criminal thing and not just a civil matter. That's the only thing that I can think of that would change things, because right now, the only way to deal with it is to, civil litigation, and civil litigation is extremely expensive. And so if you're somebody that, doesn't have unlimited resources, you're unlikely to find an attorney that's going to take the case on, unless it's a extremely nationally well-known case. Like I think it was, I'm trying to remember the name of the kid, but the kid that got accused of being a racist by, like, what was it, ABC and CNN
kid, what's his name? I forget his name. Yeah, Nick Sandmann. Yep, Nick Sandmann.
Yeah. So that was like a good case of where the media was put in check by, civil litigation, but you had lawyers who were willing to do it because they saw big, deep pockets.
Yep.
there's no criminal aspect to it, and I think that might be part of the problem.
Well, and this does lead into another problem because you're right. How do you solve the issue? And it's not a simple issue because how do you solve the issue of people lying? And I don't know if it's something that can be solved easily because if you make it easier for people to sue people, then people get sued every day. People get sued for anything you say.
And our
People
courts
get-
are already full and jacked up, and you can't even
Exactly.
get cases through the courts.
And listen, even if you are somebody that's a honest journalist, just an example, I'll give you one example from a story I ran earlier this year. I ran a story about a government contract. Within 24 hours, I had a $14,000 letter from a K Street lawyer firm that sent me a letter that said, shut up. Now, my immediate reaction when I get stuff like that is I was going to publish the letter. That was what I thought. And I stopped for a minute and I said, well, okay, hold on. Let me look into this for a minute. Well, it turns out that the letter was connected to multiple billionaires. And I was like, well, it doesn't matter then. I can't go forward with it because they can ruin me regardless. Even if I am perfectly innocent in this scenario, even if I'm perfectly okay with it, I don't have the resources to say, okay, I'm going to go sit in court because they can have a venue change. They can tie me up in legal affairs for millions of dollars, and it means nothing to them. They're billionaires. Okay. So the legal system is very difficult when it comes to this. But when these people are out here just lying flat out, my thing is that we have to the deal is, you mentioned it before, that the public wasn't ready for it. And I think the deal is we have to start demanding higher standards from our media figures. And when people are just straight up lying, when they have no evidence whatsoever, the people have to hold them to account. And it can't just be, well, it's my friend, so I'm not going to say anything about it because it's my friend. No, everyone needs to say, sorry, look, this is a professional business. And if you were trying to act professionally in this business and you're acting in bad faith, sorry, you shouldn't have done that. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with friendship at that point. This is the integrity of the field that we're in. If you're going to present yourself as a journalist or somebody that has real commentary on real national issues or real issues that people are going about, you have to be held to the same standard that everybody else is, which is evidence, evidence, evidence. If there's not evidence and you can speculate. Okay, speculation is one thing, but you can't go out and just say ridiculous claims that are not backed with anything. You can't do it. And if you do, one, you're going to get sued at some point if you do this. Karma will come after you at some point. You're going to upset the wrong person and you will get sued. And by the way, Candace is being sued. So, I mean, she's being sued by the president of France. Okay, which is just crazy.
Which is crazy. And that's another thing too. It's like American citizens that are listening to Candace on Macron and his wife. Who cares? I mean, like, seriously, what does that have anything to do with what happens here in the United States with whether or not Macron's wife is transgender? I mean, it's like, who really cares? And then when you hear her make a statement like, well, look, you can prove it right now by just, drawing your blood and giving it, and I'll send my people over. I was listening to this the other night and I'm going, are you kidding me? Like, what right does she have to demand anything like that? It's just insane.
Well, listen, to me, I think that the Macrons made a huge mistake in a PR way. They should have just ignored her entirely and she would have gone away. But the suit brought forward was stupid. That was the biggest PR disaster they've ever done. Further than that, it's almost impossible to win a case like that in the United States because you have to prove actual malice. And not only do you have to prove actual malice, you have to prove essentially it's almost a state of mind. And you have to say that Candace doesn't believe what she says. I think she believes everything she says. And I think she does believe everything she says. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And that's a huge problem. But again, the wild claims without evidence. And this is where I was getting with Candace. The deal is for her, she has tapped into a new market. Okay. She's not in real journalism that like we are, or like I am, or I know you do journalism as well. But the deal is,
and by the way, on that note, like I publish things on Substack. Anybody can go into one of the articles that I publish and go to the bottom of it, and I list all the references for everything that I talk about. Right. Why? Because when I went to college, they taught me that's what you should do on a research paper. Exactly. You should reference everything and cite everything that you are talking about and where you're getting your evidence from. So people can go and verify what you're saying. And like 90% of what I've posted on there, I've done that and made sure that there were references. The only times I didn't was when I was just talking about something that, his opinion. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and the deal is with something like Candace, this is what my thing is, that she's not really doing true style journalism. What she's doing, and I've kind of coined a new term for it, and it's political pop culture. Okay, she's talking to a different audience. She's talking to a new audience that is there. It's almost like a murder mystery type pop figure that's based in gossip, and you can see it because she does it almost on feeling and ideas, and it's a vibe behind it. That's weird, isn't it? Isn't that strange? You think that's strange, don't you? I mean, it's not the same thing as this.
It's social engineering.
That's right. When the difference is, when I say something happens, I said this happened. I have this document that shows that this happened. That's how I do it. And that's how any investigative journalist has to do it. And you have to be very good when you're an investigative journalist, because if you don't show your work, you get crucified by other investigative journalists, which is why Candace is running into such a problem, because her previous investigations that she was doing, okay, she was doing Blake Lively and some other person, two pop culture figures. I don't know who they are. I don't pay any attention to them, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And then Bridget Marcron and, the being transgender, silly stuff that, sorry, that's not going to really matter. But when you step into the PUSA stuff,
it's tabloid stuff. Like back in the day, right? That was like the Weekly World News with Bat Boy,
Exactly.
and the Enquirer, right?
Yeah, the National Enquirer. That's right. I mean, it's the same concept, but this time the problem is that what she's doing with it is not just as a tabloid. She's doing it, presenting it as non-tabloid. But the real problem she ran into is she started doing this around a figure that she shouldn't have done it around, which is what she did with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is a very important political figure and was very connected to a lot of things. And when she started doing this, she started growing in influence and started getting all these people to pay attention to it. And all of the people that pay attention and know anything in politics went, hold on a minute here. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? None of this is connected. None of this makes any sense. And you're also still not presenting the evidence behind it. And that's when people started getting angry, and she started getting this pushback. And the problem is that instead of backing off of it and going into a different direction, she has just leaned in further, and it's her ego or what it is with her.
I do think ego's involved. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
Oh yeah.
The types of behaviors that you see, the comments that she makes, do seem very ego driven. And I look, as a Christian, I have to wonder how much longer this is going to be allowed. I mean, I do believe that, pride comes before the fall, as the Bible says. And I do see this. I think there's some major ego that is driving a lot of this. And so I am starting to see a little bit of the tide. I mean, the fact that we're talking about it, right? We're not the only ones talking about it. There's a lot of people that are beginning to talk about this. And maybe this is a self-regulating system, and maybe no changes in the law are needed or anything like that, because eventually people will wake up and they'll realize, there will be a growing tide of people saying, hey, wait a minute. It's like the same thing that happened with COVID, right? At first, everybody's like, oh, go get your shot, go get your booster. And people were like, whoa, hold on a minute. And now it's, kind of come full circle. And now you got people like, hey, I'm never taking another vaccine again in my life.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think maybe it is a self-regulating system. I think this example of it, though, is probably one of the most egregious because of just how visceral it is. And you mentioned it in another part of the reason it's so visceral to people and so upsetting to people is because of the reaction that happened from people seeing Charlie Kirk get killed. That's the real. Charlie Kirk was a national tragedy. I mean, I had people telling me that it was on the same level to them as something like 9/11. I mean, that's how people felt.
It was, for me, absolutely. It was on and that's a really great example. It was on the level of 9/11 in terms of how it affected me, emotionally. It made me like really kind of think and ask myself things about even about what I put out content wise. And, there were so many things that it kind of drew in. And I think there was some PTSD, quite honestly, that a lot of people experienced after seeing that, because you just don't expect to see something like that. And I'll never forget, because the moment I saw it, and I just immediately, I knew there's no way you don't live from that.
Yeah.
And
I knew the moment I saw the video.
Exactly. People were talking, oh, he's still alive. They're working on him. I'm like, no, it's not.
No way. Yeah, he's not. He was, at the moment I saw because I saw the 4K high definition video, I was like, he's dead. He's dead.
Me too.
And it was horrible. It was horrible, and that's why I think this specific instance with Candace has gone too far. Because the reality
and
is,
I think she honestly, I think that she is completely inept in terms of understanding where the general public is on this. And particularly where her, even her audience, I think, is on this. Obviously, there's some people that still, follow her and that still, believe the Kool-Aid that she's selling. But at the end of the day, I think that I think the backlash is just beginning to, to start to show its head, and I think it's gonna come.
oh, listen, karma is a true thing, and the self-regulating part of the system, I think that that's going to work out. But in this specific scenario for her, I think the backlash, you're right. I think it's just starting, and the tide has started to turn. Okay, and the real problem is, part of the problem is that TPUSA didn't respond to it properly. They should have responded very quickly. They should have gone after her the moment she even started insinuating stuff. They should have been very forceful.
It's interesting. On that note, did you see the interview with Erica Kirk with oh gosh,
Barry
what's
Weiss?
her name? Huh?
Barry Weiss?
No, the one that she did, the one that she did on Fox News. Oh gosh, what's her name?
I'm not sure who she did with Fox on. Maybe she was either Laura or Kayla McCanney or someone like that.
No, it's right on the tip of my tongue. She's the black woman on Fox that she's often on Fox and Friends, but or the Five. I think she was on the Five a lot.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about, but I don't remember her name. Okay,
last name is Faulkner. So she did an interview with her that I thought was really interesting, and she said something, because I thought the same thing. Like, why has Erica Kirk not said something about this sooner? And she said that and it was clear she was talking about Candace Owens. She didn't mention her name, but it was totally clear who she was talking about. And she said that she understood that people grieve in their own way, and she gave grace for people who were dealing with this, maybe questioning things, as some form of, grieving in their own way. But when it became personal, and she started, and people, she said, when people are attacking me, putting my life and my children at risk, and putting and attacking, going after attacking my TPUSA family, enough, stop. And that right there, I understand. So I think that's part of it, is I think that she was probably holding back, because at first she just understood, look, people are grieving. They're taking this a lot of different ways, but clearly, it's gotten way out of control.
Yeah, I agree. And part of this is, the other thing is, I think that Erica herself, and I don't know this woman at all, but after watching her at the memorial, watching that unbelievable, the fact that the most courage I've ever seen from somebody, this is somebody that is truly full of grace, that truly actually has grace within them. And watching that, she probably was just thinking that, okay, these things, maybe these people really are upset. Maybe Candace was really close with Charlie Kirk, and maybe this is her way of dealing with it. But it got to a point that it was too much. And now that everybody notices that the moment that she started speaking, things started shifting the opposite direction. And that's what has to happen. It has to happen. Yep. But the problem is that Candace doesn't seem to be backing down, and she is saying things that she is going to regret some of the things that she has said. I mean, there's just yesterday, the day before, she said something along the lines of, I take nothing back. I would take nothing back. I don't have to take anything I said back. I was like, that's just arrogance.
Well, that's not
going to work out for you.
So that's it right there, right? I've seen people make mistakes, say things they shouldn't have said, and they show at least some modicum of humility. I don't see that with her. I see no humility whatsoever with her.
None.
And I do think that's why I think she's going to fall, and it's going to come hard. Now, interestingly, I kind of see similar things with Tucker Carlson, and now with him, it's a different thing. Like, there's definitely some sort of agenda going on there. Like you mentioned, he seems to be steering things in a certain direction. He has an agenda, and I think that that he is going to push. Now, he is always, I remember even back in the day when he was on Fox, he would often say, look, I'm not a journalist. He'd laugh, oh, I'm not a journalist. And I think that was always kind of like a way of him trying to protect himself. basically saying that he's just opinion. And but there's something very disingenuous about that, because the fact is when you present things like as if it's fact, or you bring people on and you don't challenge anything that they say, you basically allow yourself to be. But then, like the way that he attacked Ted Cruz, for example, right? And then, I think that was like right around the same time that, he had Nick Fuentes on, didn't really attack him on anything, but he attacked Ted Cruz on his position, towards Israel, and particularly on his stance as a, Christian Zionist. That kind of thing to me indicates that there's some dishonesty going there. That there's some sort of,
well, here's something really interesting though about this is that there's something about Tucker that you call him whatever you want, and I don't think he's a very genuine person anyway. I think he's very disingenuous, and I don't like what he does, because Nick Fuentes, for example here, this is a great example of somebody, I never really paid attention to the guy. Okay, I never really paid much attention to him. I didn't know who he was, didn't care. I knew he existed, but I just didn't pay attention to him. And then all of these people start talking about him and never stop talking about him. There's people that share a million clips of him every day. Oh my God, did you see what this guy said? And I'm like, okay, fine. I'll go see what he has to say. That kid, regardless of what people think about him, believes what he says. He does. He's not a grifter. He actually believes what he says. Not only does he believe what he says, he's not a grifter at all. In fact, he's been going after Candace Owens, saying, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This is ridiculous. How are you guys going along with this? I don't like this. This is no evidence behind it. It's a nonsense claim that doesn't have anything backing it. So he's going after her. But further than that, he actually doesn't like Tucker Carlson, because he said Tucker Carlson was extremely dishonest with him. He said that Tucker Carlson was nothing but genuine with him and nice to him and friendly in person. They had dinner together. They were great. And then after that, Tucker Carlson has gone around talking badly about him in every interview since then. And that's, to him, he doesn't like that. He's like, well, why didn't you ask that during the interview? He even says, he even specifically said, I thought that he was going to push me on this stuff. He didn't. He didn't push me on that stuff. And then afterwards, he goes around telling everybody this. That doesn't make any sense. And to me, that's disingenuous. But it's, again, if he's pushing some sort of specific narrative and he's trying to promote some specific narrative like you're talking about, maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's why he does that. But I don't know what it is with Tucker, but I don't, there's something about the way that he operates that I genuinely just don't find very honest. And this is actually something that comes from all legacy media reporters, really. All of the legacy media reporters, the big names in legacy media, they do strange things like that all the time. Even though people that I thought I respected, they do very strange things on a regular basis that I don't like. People go after people like Ben Shapiro a lot. They talk badly about Ben Shapiro. Say what you want about the guy. Ben Shapiro is nothing but consistent. Okay, absolutely. He has said exactly what his position is 1,000 times over. He has never been dishonest about his position ever. He is a Jewish guy that is very, very pro-Israel, very pro-conservative movement, very, very pro. Like his stances are essentially written on his head. You could write them on his desk and you'd know what they are. And everybody knows that. And everybody knows it. He's never changed his position. No. When the fight was happening over the past couple months between the two of them, they kept sharing clips of things that Ben Shapiro, and I kept watching and I'm like, well, but that's something Ben Shapiro said for 10 years. So why are you upset that he's saying that? Like, I don't understand. Like, people are surprised that he's saying things that are extremely hardline conservative. He's always said that. He's never changed that. But this is just where we live now. People just, we're going to take him out of context and you're going to say he didn't say this. Well, I've heard Ben Shapiro say that in 2015. So, it's a very interesting thing when you see the disingenuous nature of this, because some people are very genuine about the way that they're presenting their arguments and some people aren't. And it's very obvious to me who's doing it. But I don't know how you get that through to the general public. I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. Speaking of Ben Shapiro, he was one of the first people that I heard who spoke out about, and you and I have worked on some censorship stuff together to try to expose, what the federal government was involved in, basically in trying to censor people. But he was he was one of the very first people to talk about the danger of cancel culture. When people started coming out, with the whole cancel culture thing, and I think it was like the the Me Too movement and on all of that. And he really was like, look, folks, we don't want to go down this road. Cancel culture, it is a slippery slope. It is a very dangerous thing. And I remember him talking about, I wanted to look up and see if I could find the comment that he made on it. But it impressed me because everything he warned about is exactly where I've seen this go, and it's basically polarized us even more. Because instead of people being ostracized by the self-regulating system, of people waking up to the reality and going, hey, look, you're off base. Instead of that happening, you had platforms that were basically just deplatforming people. And what it did was it created this monster, of, some people, like you mentioned, who, nobody even heard of, nobody knew. And now all of a sudden you've got all these platforms that, are basically, in a way it's good that they're a bastion of free speech, but in some ways it's like you got people that are out there and there's no accountability whatsoever. And there's not even a societal system in place, right, to hold people in check. And that's really what it boils down to. It's not that we need a technical system or a legal system. We have a societal system, of keeping people in check, and it's called ostracization. And that's not existent anymore, because they can always get, they can just go on some platform where everybody believes in the same thing that they believe in, and it's a complete echo chamber.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is something that, before, when there was all this content moderation and there's these people that they would silo them out and keep them canceled and separated and all this stuff. That wasn't great. It was terrible, actually. But now we're back. And I think you're right. You nailed it, really, is that we don't have the system yet. When you're in public, next to people face to face, and you say something that is just atrocious, say something that is very, very socially unacceptable, everybody turns and looks at you and says, what the hell's the matter with you? Why would you do that? Why did you say that? That's gross. Stop that. That is something that is a natural human reaction when you see something bad. And everyone goes, okay, well, we can't, get out of here. Stop doing that. Social media is a problem because it created that in reverse in some ways. When you're on social media and you say a normal thing and people say, okay, men are men, not women. And then 1 million people comment on your post saying, yeah, what the hell's the matter with you? You're wrong. That's bad. That's evil. What's the matter? How dare you do that? Even though that's not an accurate thing, it still has the same effect. And now we're in a scenario where people have woken up on all sides of that, and it's all over the place. And we don't have the system to be able to properly check people online yet. And I don't know how that gets solved, because social media, no matter how you do it, I got an argument the other day. Ironically enough, it was with Tucker Carlson's brother about something. I don't remember what it was. And he said something venomous to me. He said something, he wrote some long paragraph talking about something I said. And I responded in kind. And, a couple minutes later, there's somebody else that apparently follows me and follows him and said, well, why did you say, are you guys really hate each other? And I said, no. Listen, I don't hate anybody because I don't take the comments people make on the internet. I don't treat that as true animosity. Some people do. Some people treat it as true animosity, but you do that. You can't take everything that you read that someone wrote on the internet because they're on their phone and they're typing, they're angry and they're typing on their phone. You may be friends in real life if you met each other and you spoke, but just because you read something they said and you don't have the facial expression, you can't take that seriously. Now, how do you do that on a large scale? I don't know, because you're never going to be able to get to a point where you can have that face-to-face interaction and you can know whether or not the person that said it was saying it out of true hatred of you, or if they were just saying it just to say it. I mean, it's a very difficult world, and I don't know how that gets solved. I don't know what you do to be able to do that, because it seems to me that no matter how you do it, social media is always going to exist now. Social media is everywhere. And I think the only way that it gets solved is when people, especially people with larger platforms, if they start arguing, maybe we need to have like a rule of some kind where if you're talking about each other constantly, you have to get on a face-to-face debate at some point. Like, I don't know, because the clip game is terrible. I hate the clip game. Someone will clip something that someone said 15 years ago, put it on the air and say, look what he said. And you're like, well, I mean, who cares what he said 15 years ago? When I was 15 years ago, I was like drunk and in college. Like, I mean, none of that matters. But it's very difficult to get that through to people.
Yeah, without a doubt. This brings up another issue, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this. there's a lot of evidence that social media, the way that it basically rewards, things with likes and thumbs ups. Like, you ever notice, like, there's no thumbs down, on
Right.
any of these things, right? It seems designed, right, to act on the pleasure center of the brain, the same neurons that fire on, they've talked about, that fire on addictive behaviors and cocaine and all of that, right? It it becomes an addiction for people that are on social media all the time. For
No,
a
it
long
does.
time, I wasn't on social media for a long time, and then when I was running for office, I had to be on it like daily, and I had to post like 3 posts a day just to be able to get, keep stay in the uh, you know have a presence out there. But I always hated it, and because I saw just how addictive it could become, and I've worried about the fact that we have laws in place that say, hey, you can't drink until you're 21. But we have no laws that say anything about, social media and its impact. And it's clear to me that there is, like, you get people on there, especially kids. I mean, think about like all the kids that have committed suicide due to cyberbullying and things like that. And, and how many these kids have said things or done things online that have just like ruined their lives. Like, thank God
Oh yeah.
that I grew up in a time when there was no social media, there was no cell phones, there were no, internet at the time that I was growing up. And I'm grateful for that, because had there been, I think our generation would have been full of anxiety and depression. And like, you look at like the numbers of how many, kids today have anxiety, depression, like mental health problems. I have to believe that a lot of it has to do with social media and its impact on young people who haven't developed those critical skills of being able to look at something and use critical thinking. And I mean, look, half the adults haven't developed those skills,
That's right.
maybe more than half, but kids especially
Significantly more
don't
than
have
half.
yeah, but kids especially don't have, those skills. And and they jump on the bandwagon and they start harassing people. And because, back when you and I were kids, right? If you wanted to, talk crap about somebody, there was, a real threat that you could get punched in the face.
That's right.
I mean, that was what was going on when I was in school. Somebody ran their
Yep.
mouth, you got punched in the face. And so unless you were willing to fight, you self-censored. And so, like, I hear people talk about how self-censorship is a terrible thing. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that in certain cases, I think, self-censorship, especially when it comes to just not being rude, but, trying to be polite and trying to have some grace, I think is a good thing. And also just, you know, I can't help but think about, like, do not judge lest you yourself be judged in the same measure that you judge others, Like, we all, I think, need to have a little more grace for each other. I remember you mentioned about how people should have to, get in front of each other and see each other face to face. And that was what Charlie Kirk did,
That's right.
was he faced people. It's not enough to just spout your views online and to talk, against somebody. But facing people and talking things through and having those debates in public, face to face, I think was one of the greatest things about what he was doing with Turning Point USA. And I think we need more of that.
I agree.
You know,
Listen, to me, I think that would be the best thing that could ever happen. All the problems we have with social media, some of the other countries are already starting to move on this. They're starting to say you can't use social media when you're younger. And I think that should be something we 100% should do. Kids don't need to be on social media at all. They don't need to be interacting. Kids need to be interacting with each other on a regular basis, not talking through screens, not talking through video games. That is something that we should move on as a country. It should be something that's mandatory.
I agree.
In terms of how we fix the personal interaction, we need to talk more. People need to talk more. I have 3 brothers. Okay. So I'm one of 4. And when we sit around, we will sit and argue for hours. We can sit around and argue about who knows what. It doesn't matter what it is. But we'll sit there and argue for 4 or 5 hours. We all still love each other. We love each other dearly. I mean, this is something that we've done since we're children. We've done this our whole lives, arguing about who knows what it is. My mother, I don't know what happened with your father. You mentioned your father was in the hospital. My mother was just in the hospital. She just had a heart attack the other day. So we were all down in the hospital with her. And we're sitting there, and my mother is laying in the hospital bed, and all 4 of us are in the room arguing with each other. And my father told me, he said he was laughing because he watched my mom. She'd come out of her kind of a doze, and she'd hear all of us arguing, and she'd smile and fall back asleep because she's so used to it. This is normal for us. And this is how I grew up, to the point that I can have an argument with somebody and I can still be your friend. That doesn't bother me. But there's a lot of people that have never experienced that. And they think that anytime you have an argument with somebody, that's just the end. You can't ever be friends with that person ever again. That's just not true.
That's an interesting problem that it seems to be more of a problem with the younger generations that grew up with social media. I mean, I've even seen it with some of my own kids, right, where they can't handle confrontation because it's always like in person, right? It's always cloaked behind, social media, or it's always cloaked behind, so they don't know how to deal with those emotions, deal with the anxiety, the stress, of having a debate. I mean, I had a friend who's basically a socialist communist, and he's about my age. We both served in the Army together, and I've had many, debates, and where I call him out on his bullshit, and he does the same to me, and we'll have it out, even in a text conversation, and the conversation always ends with "I love you, brother,"
That's
even
right.
though we're about as opposite politically as we could possibly be. There's still
one of my best friends is a raging communist.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm a conservative Catholic, and we will have heated arguments.
yeah.
I mean, for years, we would be out in front of, I lived on the other side of town, and we would sit out on our porch and sit there and have beers until late in the night and yell at each other about God, who knows what. I mean, it doesn't matter what it was. I mean, just whatever the current news item is, whatever. And we could argue for hours, and people would be like, what, do you guys hate each other? Like, no, not at all, actually. This is like one of my best friends. I mean, it was normal. It was normal, and people just find it strange, and we need to figure out a way to get that back, because I grew up where my family had many people that would come to the home, and we would sit around the table together, we would have a meal together, and we would argue about who knows what, but we always knew that they were always welcome at our table. I was always welcome. You were more than welcome here, even if we completely disagree on everything. Just because you disagree does not mean you need to hate each other. And I don't know how you get that through to the younger generation, but it's something we really need to get back, because if we don't have that, then people just get more and more polarized. They believe that they have nothing in common with people that they have far more in common with than you would like to believe. Most people, and this is something I tell people when they're trying to figure out how to have conversations, is, especially conservatives, okay? Especially people that are very, very in tune conservative in conservative news. When you're talking to a new person, someone that is, you're trying to influence them into the conservative media or influence them into news and whatnot, maybe don't start with George Soros controls the world. Maybe. Just maybe. And don't start there. Okay. Like, maybe ask them, do they have the same issues with the trash company that you do? I mean, you got to start somewhere, and you can't start at the extreme. You got to start you can't start at the extremes, because if you start with, George Soros and the Open Society Foundation has controlled the NGOs that control the entire country's, funding networks, they're going to look at you like, what the hell's the matter with this guy? Don't start there. Try somewhere else. I promise it's probably a better decision. And I promise you, your neighbor that lives right next to you, you have far more in common with them than you do with somebody that lives across the country in California. Okay, that you just do, because they live right next to you. Their problems are the same problems that you have. Try talking about those before you start talking about the same problems that affect the whole country and everybody all at once. It's not the good way to go about it.
Yeah. No, that's true. I want to shift our conversation a little bit. I think we've kind of beat the horse dead, with this one. There's a couple of things that have been going on in the news, and one of them is like going on right now. I haven't looked to see what the headlines are at this moment.
What's going on with that? I haven't checked the most recent.
Yeah, there was a shooting at Brown University, and I want to talk about this for a minute because I do think that there is something that always seems to get forgotten. And I'll just, state for the record here, I'm a big gun rights believer. I mean, on my wall, you don't see it in this moment, but I've got, guns all over the wall. I intentionally display my Second Amendment love, very proudly. But I understand where people's fear comes from. And I want to talk about that for a minute because I had this kind of like mental picture that I think really helps people who maybe are afraid of guns because they see gun violence, universities and things like that, right? And so they just want, a ban on guns or they want gun control. And I want to make something clear. Brown University, I was curious. I looked up their policy, right? And Brown University strictly prohibits concealed carry of firearms and all weapons on its campus and at university-sponsored events. The university's official weapons and firearm policy states that possession, use, or storage of weapons or firearms is banned on all university property, including buildings, grounds, parking areas, and vehicles. And this applies to everyone, students, employees, visitors, and guests, regardless of whether they hold a valid concealed carry permit. And it's part of the code of student conduct and all of that, right? Why do I bring this up? I bring it up because of this. Look, I saw a news story, and actually I think it was on Brown University's website, but they basically showed how the university had sent out a text message to all the students, basically telling them to shelter in place and to get out if they could get out and flee. But if they were, in the area where the shooter was, to shelter in place and barricade themselves, to protect themselves. And if that failed, and if they couldn't get out and they couldn't barricade themselves, as a last resort, to fight. How the hell are you supposed to fight somebody who's got a gun if you're not armed? And to me, it's just a common sense question. So the question becomes, do we want to live in a world where everybody's walking around with guns? Well, first of all, criminals don't care about following the laws. This guy certainly didn't follow the law. He didn't follow the school regulations. He came in there and in the, my background, of course, is, in the military. In the military, we call that a soft target. The schools are soft targets because, maybe they got some security on campus, but certainly not enough to, actually defend or protect people. And the fact that nobody in the room where this guy went in there and shot people up and killed them, nobody was armed, in that room, not a single person. So I just want to, say to folks that have questions about this, I look at it like this. Where does the fear of guns come from? Because we walk down a sidewalk and, I don't sit there worrying that the car that's driving down the street is going to swerve to hit me on purpose. Why don't I think that? Because most people aren't thinking about committing homicide using their vehicle. I don't worry about when I go to a restaurant, and I'm at like, a restaurant that the cook is going to come out and start stabbing people. Why? Because that's insanity, Most people aren't doing that. And the truth, it's also the same holds true for people who have concealed carry, for people who own guns, who carry them. They're not thinking, oh, I'm going to go and kill a bunch of people. I hope to God I never have to use my guns for anything other than just target practice. But to limit people from being able to even protect themselves, I think this is a big problem. And West Virginia, I think it was last year, they passed a law that legalized or basically made it so that no university campus in the state could prevent, somebody from, being able to carry concealed. And I get and understand the need to, I get it and understand when states say, hey, look, we prefer people to carry concealed rather than, carrying a gun holstered on the side of your pants. I get that. And in all actuality, most of the evidence, for people that are, promoters of gun rights would say it's better to conceal carry, because you don't want somebody who's an active shooter to come in and see, they're going to go for the guy with the gun first, and it's
Yep.
better to have the element of surprise. So I am all for, people being able to carry. I think universities especially, and in all honesty, I think public schools, anywhere where there are events and things like that, I think they should be able to allow people to carry, and I think there's a reason for it. If we lived in a world where there were no guns, and I've lived in that world, it was called Japan. I lived in Japan for 3 years, never had to worry about gun violence. But you know what they did have? They had stabbings. They had people use their cars as weapons. But it was always crazy people. But they don't have gun culture there. And so it was pretty safe because they don't have guns being brought into. It's an island nation that's pretty much cut off from everything. But that is not the case here in America. We have a gun culture. And so I've always felt like the notion that we're going to have a gun culture, we're going to have a Second Amendment, and yet we're going to have places where you are restricted from being able to have a gun, so that you can defend yourself in the event of some crazy person coming in there and wanting to kill a bunch of people. That is a problem. And I hope and I pray that we can get reasonable people. It does seem like the Supreme Court, especially this current Supreme Court, has been very pro-gun compared to previous Supreme Courts. Like there's been more, cases of gun control overturned to allow for the Second Amendment. And I think that that's a good sign. And I'll be honest with you, I think the leftists probably hurt themselves by, going to, when they started attacking the Supreme Court justices and going to their homes, and threatening them and all of that. I'll bet you it made a lot of them feel unsafe. And they probably say, hey, you know what? I don't think it's a good idea, for people to not be able to arm themselves and defend themselves. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I have a bit of an extremist view for the Second Amendment in this country. I believe that they should pass out firearms on every street corner in America to every American citizen, as so long as that you have a valid citizenship. Pass them things out for free. Every corner in the country, every single place that you can imagine, every citizen. When you're walking down, there should be a vending machine that you can scan your ID that says I'm a U.S. citizen, and it just gives you a loaded firearm. That's what should happen. And the reason for that is actually quite simple, because, like you said, the criminals are going to use the guns anyway. But I'll tell you right now, it would be about 1 week of that, and all of those people would be dead. Every single one of them. The people that pull out their guns to try and be criminals, they would get blown away by 20 people in the local area, and then suddenly all of that would stop. And then all of that would stop immediately, and suddenly if every criminal realized that everywhere they went, every single person had the ability to shoot them just like they shoot at them, criminals stop then.
I remember,
go ahead.
Absolutely. I remember seeing a documentary years ago, and they were interviewing all of these guys that were, in prison, that had, committed multiple, burglary, breaking in or assault and all these other, crimes. And they were all asked, if you knew that a home, that the homeowner was armed, would you have broken into that home? I said, absolutely not. They did their best to avoid homes that they knew, were armed, and they went into homes where, they believed that people weren't armed, because they wanted easy targets. And I agree with you on that. And one thing I would add to that, and I think that, I think this actually is it seems crazy to most people, but I think it's actually a reasonable view. Because we have a Second Amendment right to own guns, I think every child should have weapons training in school, in public school. I think that they should have, they should be teaching them how to properly handle a weapon, how to handle it safely, and there should be gun weapons training, because everybody, when they turn 18, they're going to be able to go out and buy a gun. And in some states, maybe even, when they're younger, right? If it's like a rifle for hunting and stuff like that. So to me, at about 15, 16, I don't know what the age should be, maybe a little bit less in some places, maybe a little higher in others, but I think every school should have gun safety training, and and basically, give people the opportunity to handle guns. Because what happens is people don't touch them, and then they're never around them, and so then that's why I think people they become fearful of them, but they end up ultimately being at risk because they have no ability to defend themselves. I guarantee you, if everybody owned guns, like you look, there's been tons and tons of studies on this. I think it was like one of the best cases was in Florida, and I don't remember the exact statistics, so I'm not going to quote the statistics, but I just know that they had a major problem with rape, and the state of Florida put out something through all the sheriff's offices where they say, hey, we'll give women free self-defense courses with their weapons, and if they go and they buy a gun. And they did this, and it significantly reduced rape. And because again, people know if people get shot, it's going to end that.
Oh yeah, I mean, listen to me. There's a great story from my hometown, or where I live currently, not my hometown, but where I lived out here in Ohio, in Springfield. Years ago, there was a story that this happened. There was home invasion that happened, and a group of criminals, they kicked the door in, and they opened the door, and from the top of the stairs, a 16-year-old with a 12-gauge shotgun blew the first guy completely away, instantly, dead instantly. And the next guy, he tried to pull his gun, and he blew him away too. 2 dead instantly. You know what happened? Home invasions dropped in this city by almost 100%. It was a 16-year-old with a shotgun, and he was there, and he said, my dad told me I was supposed to defend the home. He was there with his mom and his little sister. Shockingly, there's no more home invasions. Good job, kid. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that people don't talk about, and home invasions dropped dramatically after that because, well, damn, the 16-year-old had a shotgun. If I break into any home in this city, what if there's another 16-year-old with a shotgun, or anybody with a shotgun? I mean, if you come in my home, I've got more guns anyway. I mean, I've got them all over the place. So, the deal is that in my state now, Ohio has constitutional carry. We don't have to even have permits anymore. Yeah, I mean, it's the best law ever. I love it. I think that should be in every state. And I'd love to see what the data is on constitutional carry states to non-constitutional carry. I bet you crime goes down in every single one of those states.
I'll tell you what,
we do not have the ability to infringe it. I mean, that's just the way it needs to be.
The places that I've been where they are very, very pro-gun, and the likelihood of people are, carrying concealed is very high, you don't see people getting into arguments and fights. They're very polite.
That's right.
You don't see road rage cases here in West Virginia.
That's right.
Because likely somebody will get shot. You never know. And so there's it's that whole self-censorship thing, right? It's when the possibility of you attacking somebody or getting into a fight with somebody that could be armed, you're going to think twice, and you're going to have a little bit more restraint. I'll give you a personal, this is my own personal anecdote of that. I was with my son who's in the Army, but it was before he went overseas to Korea. He's now over there, but we were at a 7-Eleven in a parking lot, and I had parked. It's kind of a weird parking lot. Like there's nowhere to park except for right up front. And it's a big parking lot. And some guy had parked right behind me, and I was in a big old pickup truck. And he had a very small, kind of low level car. And I got in, not really paying attention, didn't even look, at the backup camera. And I just put it in reverse and backed right into the guy's car. Now he wasn't in the car. And, but I went into the 7-Eleven. I said, hey, look, I'm sorry, but I hit somebody's car. It's the black, I don't remember what kind of vehicle it was, but, and this guy came out, and he was a young guy, and he was just going off, man, mouthing off to me, and, cussing and swearing, and, calling me names and all this stuff. And I was like very calm, very polite, pulled out my insurance card, said, sir, look, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I said, but, here's my insurance, and, let's take care of this. And he just would not stop. And my son was actually getting nervous because this guy was he seemed like he was going to get violent. And, but I was very, very calm. And when we got back in afterwards, finally, the guy kind of calmed down and everything. And when we got back into the truck and, to leave, my son looks at me and goes, man, I thought you were going to get in a fight. I said, you know what? If I hadn't have been armed, I probably would have. But if I got into a fight with this guy, there's a good chance that, he could have ended up, getting me into a struggle or something, and I might have ended up killing him, and I don't want that on my conscience. And so it caused me have some restraint because I was armed.
Yeah,
And I
it does.
think, yeah,
It does
and
work
I
like
and I've seen that with other people, and I've heard those types of stories with other people as well. So I'm a firm believer that we need more guns, not less guns.
I agree. Pass them out on the street corner for free, given to every American citizen. I mean, listen, I really do advocate for that, and people think it's nuts. And I'm like, listen, it would be about 1 week, and all of those problems would go away.
Yeah.
You think it's crazy, but you imagine that if every time there's a gangland shooting, if suddenly all of the other citizens around the gangland shooting all pull out their guns and start shooting back at the gangland assailants, suddenly the gangland assailants aren't going to be shooting at each other on a regular basis anymore.
That's right.
That's just how it would be.
Yep.
And it's just
Have you just out of curiosity? Have you seen? Did they catch this guy yet?
No, listen, I don't know what's going on in Rhode Island. This is a disaster. The guy, they said that they caught him, then they didn't catch him. They have nothing. They have no information. They just released a little bit of cell phone footage from him, from a recording of some university camera. Apparently, the police chief isn't even there. He has, they said he was going to show up, it's going to be more than an hour before he gets there, which I said, what is he riding horseback? It's Rhode Island. I mean, I don't understand where this guy is, but no, there's no update. So the police chief arriving at Campbell.
It's just absolutely crazy. This guy came in dressed in all black. That's another thing that's just kind of like, that should automatically, trigger somebody's suspicion. You think about like these, Antifa guys and all of that, and they come in dressed in all black, with masks and everything, so you can't see anything. And I'm kind of surprised that's even allowed in some of these cities, where they these guys are rioting and stuff like that.
Listen, I've never understood that stuff. Like when the Antifa people, when you see them show up outside of a place, like, okay, look, I understand the right to a protest. Every American has the right to assembly, has the right to have a protest, but protests still usually have to have permits, and you have to have organization behind it.
You don't have a right to block the road. You don't have a right to get in people's face.
Nate, it's not just that. It's I'm going to show up outside of an ICE facility wearing full tactical gear, a gas mask, and a backpack and an umbrella. What are you there for? You're not there as a protester. You're there as an assailant. I mean, that's what that should be to me. It's crazy to me that we allow that.
Yeah. No, I agree. We were you had done a story to kind of shift things a little bit more. I wanted just real quickly kind of talk about what's been going on in Minnesota, and you're much more up on what's happening there and with the Somalians and all of that. What can you tell us about that? And what is going on there? There's some big, massive fraud thing that's been happening, right?
Well, there's another guy that you should probably have on your show if you want to get the full details on it. There's a guy named Dustin Grange. He's a friend of mine. I'll send you his information.
Yeah, please do.
But he's in Minnesota. But the deal is that this fraud that is going there it's just expanding. I mean, it started out as a couple $100 million, which is bad enough, and then it goes to $1 billion, and now it's at $8 billion. I mean, it's just not ending.
This is like on the level of this is like, it reminds me of the USAID scandal.
Oh yeah, it's the same sort of thing
locally in our country.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, this to me, it keeps getting bigger, and now they're showing that apparently now there's a new Somalian fraud scheme that's been uncovered in Ohio, and the person in Ohio that uncovered it said that it's bigger than the one that was happening in Minnesota. I mean, I think that we're going to end up finding billions and billions of dollars are missing from Medicaid, and it's all going to have gone to fraud. It's all going to be going to fraud. It's absurd, and I think again, we're going to find out that this is going to be attached to Democrat politicians.
Remember during COVID, all the PPP loans and everything like that, they found out there were billions, hundreds of billions of dollars going overseas to people that didn't even exist and companies that didn't even exist. It was just insane.
It's horrible. This is what happens when there's no accountability for our money. That's one of the best things that Doge did, was that just showed what the absurd things that our government and the lack of transparency on how government money is spent. And the reality is, the reason it happens is because these people, it's not their money and they don't care. That's the problem with it, really. We need to fix that as a country. We really do.
One of the comments here, I got to post it because it's just funny. 8 billion could have bought a lot of tampons for Tim.
One in every bathroom. Tampon Timmy. My goodness.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
My goodness.
Well, I think this has been a lot of interesting topics. We've kind of gone a few different places tonight, but is there anything else that, is kind of going on right now that, that you want to talk about, or that's interesting?
Well, not specifically. I've got a bunch of big things coming up personally. The beginning of the year is going to be very interesting for me. I've got some new stuff happening. I'm moving into this full time now. So this is some exciting things are happening for me, and I'll make sure to keep up with you, and we'll have to do another one of these. And you should come on my show. I do
Definitely.
weeknights at 9, so I'll have to have you on one night. We can go through a show as well. But this is a great conversation. I hope all of your listeners got something out of it. To me, I enjoy coming on and talking to you because, we've been friends for a few years now. And, things have just, it's interesting. It seems to me that you were in the middle of your campaign when we met, and then I was starting this career of mine. And now we've kind of both moved in the same direction because I've got my own show. You've got your own show. I mean, it's been interesting that it's been a crazy couple years, Nate. I mean, it has been a wild couple years. This year's particularly for me. I don't know if you know that I was swatted earlier this year. So,
No.
yeah, that happened to me earlier in the year.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it has been a crazy
See,
year.
that kind of thing, when they find out, and they know, man, look, it's not hard to figure out who's doing this. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Believe me, NSA knows everything when it comes to that. They can find it. But to me, that kind of thing, where when somebody swats somebody, that to me, that should get attempted murder.
Oh, yeah.
I don't understand why
exactly
we don't, because if somebody did that to me here where I live, or anybody for that matter in West Virginia, man, I mean, that could turn into a very bad scene. And
Oh, yeah.
honestly, that would be attempted murder.
It should be. It should be charged as attempted murder. And they need to make examples of these people. Now, I will say that there is some interesting stuff that's happened on this same note, because apparently the Secret Service busted a giant swatting farm of servers up in upstate New York. Now,
Interesting.
well, just the fact that it was Secret Service, Nate, is just crazy to me. Like, I mean, that whole story is that would take us an hour or two to unpack that. But there's a whole bunch of interesting things
Is this
happening.
a story where it was like not too far away from the UN, that it was like maybe, I don't know, 50 miles away or something. So it was far enough, but they found like this massive server farm or cell phone chip farm.
Yep. And apparently it was being used to swat, U.S. members of Congress. Listen, I don't know what, the theories were. Well, in the middle of the swatting stuff. So there was about 15 other conservative people that were all swatted at the same time, and I got wrapped up in it somehow. I don't know how it happened to me. We never could figure out why. We all talked amongst ourselves. We're all friends now, and we've all talked amongst ourselves. Why did this happen? What did we say? What was it? We started putting out content to see if we could try and test it and see if we could get it to happen again if we really pushed on an issue. We never could figure it out. But then this comes out, and they say that it was being used by foreign governments to swat members of Congress. And I'm like, maybe that's why it was so absurd. I mean, maybe it really is that deep. I don't know. I really don't. And until there's real answers on that stuff, I'm not satisfied with it. Obviously, the FBI hasn't told me anything, but I know they don't talk about investigations. It doesn't matter. They're not going to tell me anything, even if they have a huge case on it. I mean, they're not going to tell me. So I don't know, but I agree with you, though. It is attempted murder by proxy. That's what it is. I mean, I got dragged out of my house at 3 a.m. at gunpoint with AR-15s in front of my children. So it's not a joke. Jeez. And if it was any other scenario, the only reason it didn't become a big of a problem is because that same night I had published an article talking about swatting. I literally talked about it that day. So it was in the top of my mind, and I'm hearing, megaphones outside of my house. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, I mean, seriously, it's some serious stuff. I mean, and there was one of the guys, he drew his weapon, and he, fortunately they managed to talk each other down. The cops did, but he drew his firearm and he was ready to defend himself. I mean, he had no idea, but he's got the cameras on it and everything. So it is a real big issue, but I don't know if it's really to the level of it's like, foreign governments doing it, then, I mean, that's above my pay grade.
Yeah. Wow. One last thing that I want to ask you about before we kind of wrap things up. You mentioned that you're going into this full time, and we were talking earlier today, and you had brought up something that I thought was a really interesting point, and that is that as you get into doing this kind of work more as your profession, right? How do you stay grounded? How do you not allow yourself to become part of the problem, like we see all over the place, where people get a big head. They get so into it that they become separated, right, from the average Joe, and they don't know what's going on in the lives of, the mechanic down the street. And so they lose touch with the pulse of what's really going on in America. How do you keep from falling into that? And like, let's say that you have great, and I hope you do have great success, but let's say that you have great success, and and you get to the point where, because the truth is the more famous you become, the more you kind of have to protect yourself from weirdos and wackos, and so you do start separating yourself, and it's just a natural thing that happens, but you still got to be able to have some level of connection with the rest of America, right, in order to be a effective investigative journalist.
I agree. And this is something, Dane, it's interesting that you bring this up, because I had this conversation earlier today, because I don't know. And I don't know the answer to that question yet. How do you stay grounded, especially when you start getting into this stuff, when you're really doing it all the time and you're out here trying to make an impact and you're getting bigger? How do you keep yourself from getting disconnected? Because one of the greatest benefits I had when I moved out here, I moved away from the political world when I was young because I hated it. I thought it was gross. I thought it was poisonous. I thought DC was poisonous. And I saw it growing up. I grew up in DC area. I grew up seeing politicians, meeting presidents, meeting senators, meeting these people. And I looked at it and I said, this is not a world that I want to be part of. These people are scum. These people are liars. They're snakes. And I know they are. And I moved away. And for the past 10 years, I have lived as a small little house, a small little town in the middle of nowhere, and worked and fixed vehicles and done stuff. And it has given me a perspective that I never would have had coming into this. And now I know what it's like. I know what the middle class of America is talking about, because I work with these people. These are my friends. These are people that I consider family. And now that I'm moving back away from it, I have asked myself that question multiple times recently. How do I maintain that grounding? And I think the only answer is you can't disconnect from it completely. You have to maintain the friendships. You have to go make sure I never burn bridges. That's something I've been very good about in my life. I don't like burning bridges with people. I like maintaining friendships. And the one thing that I think I'm going to have to make sure I do is that I don't lose connection with the people that I worked with for 10 years. And I make sure I come back and talk to these people, because this is the reason I'm doing it in the first place. The reason I started doing this is because I looked around and I saw that no one was talking about what's really happening in this country. No one's talking about the towns in the desolate wasteland that has been wasted across the Midwest. You see it in West Virginia. I mean, it's the same thing in Ohio. What happened to these cities? These cities that used to be beautiful, you can see the architecture that used to be beautiful here, and now there's nothing left. Now there's nothing left. And you wonder why. Well, I know why. It's because the people that I was talking about, the poisonous people in DC, don't care what happens out here. And that's what we need to change. So if I can keep myself grounded, I think that's the only way, is remembering why I started in the first place.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Like when I was running for office, I was concerned about that too. And one of the things that I know helped me, and even like with my show, is, while I have a lot of people that on my show that people know, and, that have some level of fame or have written books and things like that, I try to also include, having some people on my show that are just your everyday average people from, West Virginia, people I know, that, maybe they have a perspective on something that is, important, or an issue that's going on. And that's been something that has helped me, I think, to kind of keep that connection. And, because if the only people we ever empower, if you will, or platform, if you will, are the people who are famous, or the people who are, have name recognition, we're only going to hear, basically from the same, from people that are basically in the same position that we're in. Right. And I think it's important to make sure that you're having the common man, that, when you do interviews and do stories and things like that, that you continue, to incorporate some of those stories into the mix, and that can help.
That's one of the things I do on my show. My show, I run it I run it on X, so I can also have spaces so people can come up and talk. And I want people to come up and talk. And it's not just so I have content filler. That's not why I do it.
Spaces is really cool for that. Yeah, I agree. That's a really great tool for that very thing, right?
Yep. That's why it's essentially, if you have a radio show as well. And to me, I use it as the call-in for my show. So to me, it's the ability to have, I can have whoever I want on stage and they can ask whatever they want. And they can talk about whatever they want, whatever they think is important. And I think that's a great way to keep grounded. It's been very helpful. So
very important question. That was where I was going to go next is, where can people follow you? Where can they find out what you're doing? Tell folks, this is your opportunity to let people know.
The best place to find me is on wcdispatch.com. That's my website. But you can also always find me on X. That's where I'm the most active. You're going to see the most content out of me on WC Dispatch, or it's at WC Dispatch on X. So you always find me on X, but I'm always on wcdispatch.com. Weeknights at 9 is my show, and the name of the show is The Political Theater. So the show is weeknights at 9. It goes 2 hours. So, and nice. I know you'd like that because you even used the phrase earlier, and I thought that was funny.
Perfect.
It is. The one thing is trying to convince people and tell people that a lot of what you see is theater, and it's difficult for people to see through the theater sometimes. So that's why I named the show that. So
that's funny. That's great.
And interestingly enough, it was a listener who named the show for me.
That's great.
It was a listener that chimed in. They said you should name The Political Theater. I was like, that is beautiful. That is a perfect name.
Yep. A lot of great comments in there, and I want to thank folks for really participating in this. I know I wasn't able to get to everybody's comments and questions, but I just want to thank all the listeners. We got about 1,600 people that have connected with the show tonight, and it's just great. We have some really great people that come on the show and that join in the comments section, and this is the kind of conversation I like having best. When we can just kind of off script and just talk about issues and talk about the things that are going on. I think the things that we talked about tonight are very important. I think this issue of how do we deal with these, divisive people who, are bringing damage, to society, to the Republican Party, to MAGA, whatever. And I can't help but think about, scripture. We're both Christians, and the scripture is very clear. It talks about a divisive person, right? And like how the church is supposed to handle them. You go to them once, you go to them twice, and after that, you have nothing to do with them. Because I think they recognize that somebody that brings divisiveness and disunity is a very dangerous person. Now, sometimes you have to divide, and you have to, you have to cut off, people that are spreading, falsehoods or teaching, bad things or, that are immoral. But at the end of the day, ostracization is really our only tool, right? And that is like the self-regulation. As society, we can say, hey, that's unacceptable behavior. And so, I'm going to, cut you off. I'm not going to go to your show. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to give you any kind of, any kind of points towards your numbers. And I think that's the best thing that we can do. And so I just want to encourage folks, look, be willing to have the conversation with your friends, your family, your circle of influence. That's one thing I think is important, is we all have a circle of influence. Yes, Walter's and mine might be a little bit larger because of our platform and the shows that we do, but everybody has a circle of influence, whether it's at your church, whether it is, your social groups or your family, even within your work. And obviously not everything is appropriate to talk, about at all of these different places. So you got to use some common sense and some wisdom, but we have to start speaking up when we see things that people are talking about that are wrong. I'll be honest with you. I have seen friends of mine that I have had for the last, few years since I ran for office, people who have followed me, people who have, been on my social media, even some people I've had on my shows in the past, that I'll be honest, I would not have them on my show today because they have gone down a road that I cannot go down with them. And I have spoken about and, confronted a couple of them. I've confronted them on these issues privately because my goal is not to embarrass them, but my goal is to try to talk some sense into them. And there's been a couple that I've had to cut off because they're so vitriolic and toxic, to anything that I stand for. So I think it's important that we have a responsibility, to speak up when we see things that are wrong and try to correct it. But, like the Bible says, you go to the person directly, especially if it's somebody right? I mean, we're talking about, Candace and Tucker. We don't know them personally. We're talking about them because they are influencers without a doubt. But for your people that your family, your friends, right? Pull them aside, talk to them, challenge them, say, hey, look, I care about you. You're my friend. Did you know that what you're talking about or that thing you posted online that like, and this is an example of what happened to me. A friend of mine posted something and it was straight out of Nazi, World War II propaganda. I mean, it was literally a propaganda piece from World War II, Nazi party. And I brought that to his attention. I'm like, do you realize what you just posted is literally, Nazi party propaganda? And I showed him. I went and showed him where that came from. And so, and he was like, oh man, I didn't know that. He was just basically reposting something that he saw and believed was true, but wasn't. And that's what we have to do. We've got to pull these people. So he didn't have any ill will, but he was misinformed. And so that's the kind of thing that I think, if we all start stepping up and speaking about these things, we might actually be able to make a difference because eventually it will turn the tide. And so, I want to thank you again, Walt, for coming on. I always enjoy, our conversations. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to meet you, when I was running for office. And, it's been a great show. I always like to ask my guests, we talked about a lot of things. What is the one, if you had one thing that is most important to you that people take away from our conversation tonight, what would it be?
Do not be disheartened. It'll be all right. Everyone always wants to be upset and worried that we're never going to make it, that nothing's ever going to be okay, that everything's falling apart. It's not. Everything's going to be all right. And if you believe in this country and you believe in God, there's a reason that some of us were set on this path. And I believe more than anything and more than ever that there's a reason all of us are doing it in the first place. So that's what I say. People never be disheartened, never be discouraged, and never give up.
Absolutely. And with that, folks, I always like to do at the end of the show, I always like to pray us out. So I'm going to do that now. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for Walt and for WC Dispatch and what they're doing, the great work they're doing over there. And I just pray, God, that you would bless the endeavors that Walt is working on. The fact that he's going into this full time, I think is great. We need more people like him that have integrity. And I pray your blessing would be on him and your protection as he is, stepping into a world where he obviously, sometimes makes enemies. And I pray that you keep him safe. But I also pray that you protect him against, the temptations that come, with reporting the news and that thing that we were talking about, but about staying grounded and staying connected. I pray that you'd help him to be able to be successful in that. Also, Lord, just lift up our country right now. We are in a place where there's so much polarization, there's so much division, there's so much hatred and vitriol, and it's really the devil's work. There's no doubt about it. That he comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And we see that happening right now within our own party, within the MAGA movement. And I just pray that you would silence the mouths of those that are, that are speaking falsehoods, that you would correct them. And for those that are, full of pride and arrogant and unwilling to listen to reason and unwilling to even see that they're doing something that's wrong, I pray, God, that you'd humble them as only you can do. And I pray, Lord, for our nation, that you would bring healing, that you would get rid of the overly, that we would be vigilant, that we would clearly not just believe everything we're told, but at the same time, that we would not be so suspicious that we see a conspiracy everywhere, even where there is no conspiracy. And there's even a scripture in Isaiah that talks about that, Lord. And I just thank you. Lord, I thank you for giving us wisdom and giving us critical thinking and giving us the ability to research things out and look for ourselves and try to ensure that what we are looking at is truth and not falsehood. And I just pray, God, that you would help more and more people, especially today, America's youth, to quickly learn how to be able to discern truth from falsehood. I just ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, folks, with that, thank you so much for joining the show. remember, I'll be on next Saturday as well, but I'm also likely going to have a show tomorrow night as well. And so I'm probably going to start increasing the number of shows that I'm doing again now that, things with my day job have kind of settled down a little bit. But I appreciate all of you that have been faithful listeners and followers of the show. And so with that, have a great night and God bless.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.